What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni Sensei here with What If Mark Grayson Was Born in DC X Invincible Universe? DC/Invincible Crossover. Part 3. If you enjoy this type of content, please super smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. Let's dive into the rise of Invincible without further ado. In a vast warehouse full to the brim with relics and pieces of technology both recognizable and some completely alien, two men walked side by side. Their footsteps echoed in the vast space around them. As you can see, Mr. Luther, this is going to be the biggest auction yet. Our sponsor is very keen on it working out well. The first man said. It is indeed impressive, Mr. Mannheim, but we both know I did not come all the way here to peruse your goods, Lex stated as he was eager to cut to the chase. Indeed, you wish to purchase one of the products before it has even gone to auction, Bruno said with a grin on his face. A frown formed on Lex's face as he inspected Bruno's facial expression. Mr. Mannheim, that stone which you acquired was already mine. You should be glad that I am willing to negotiate rather than use more unscrupulous tactics. Lex stated in a calm but rather threatening manner. However, it didn't seem effective as Bruno sounded out a deep rumbling laugh. And they say you're the smartest man on the planet. You should know threats will do you no good, Mr. Luther. You should also know that I am well aware of what this stone really is. He stated as he reached into our suit pocket and pulled out the shiny, seemingly platinum stone. Lex grits his teeth at the audacious behavior of Bruno as he dares to openly flaunt the very thing he'd come here for. Your obsession with Superman is quite unhealthy, Mr. Luther, though I honestly can't say I care much. But what I will tell you is what I tell everyone who comes seeking to buy before the auction has started. Piss off and wait till the auction starts. Lex found his blood boiling at the disrespect he was being shown. You'll regret crossing me, he said before turning on his heels and walking out of the warehouse, leaving Bruno alone with a wide grin on his face. Mark sped across the sky, leaving Gotham in only a few seconds. He knew he was in trouble. Harley would definitely give him grief over leaving her at a bus station. He would need to make it up to her or risk her being a nightmare for the next few months. Luckily, Batman was true to his word, and when he checked his balance in his legal account, he saw that over $2 million had been deposited into his account, which seemed a little low considering his dad was about to take over the planet. He'd just need to buy her some expensive liquor and maybe some food from her favorite takeout, and he'd be good. Harley was easy like that. The trip from Gotham to New York didn't take long, and Mark found himself landing at the bus station they had both stayed at. While it did cause quite a scene, he still had his makeshift mask on. However, as expected, Harley wasn't there. Mark didn't expect her to be, as it would be quite strange for her to spend 2 weeks at a bus station, but when he thought about it, he honestly couldn't say there wasn't a possibility that she would do something like that. Mark guessed the only other place she'd go back to was her apartment building to maybe try to get some cash or belongings, though he didn't put it past her to occupy one of her tenants' apartments. Mark sighed before flying up into the air again and shooting off towards Harley's apartment building, though he figured he should probably make a stop on the way, so he scanned the streets of New York till he found a bodega at the corner of 140th Street. Mark landed on the street in front of the bodega. He didn't like causing such a commotion, but he was in a rush, so he didn't feel like landing somewhere with no people. The bell rang as the door opened and Mark stepped inside. He immediately headed down the aisle and inspected the selection of alcohol they had. However, what he hadn't realized was that the bodega was being robbed. A man with a gun pointed at the cashier moved his finger to his lips, giving him the universal sign to shush. She probably won't notice if I give her the cheapest bottle. She gulps down vodka like it's water anyway, Mark said to himself with a chuckle as he picked up a bottle of vodka from the bottom shelf. He opened the lid and sniffed it before holding it back in slight disgust. That's rough. Pretty much just gasoline, he said before putting the cap on. He wasn't going to drink it, so might as well just get it anyway. Don't move, someone behind him said in a calm but threatening tone. Mark turned around to see a balding man with a gray beard and too few teeth. He was homeless or a junkie or both. Mark sighed. Dude, just leave me alone. I don't care who you are or what you're doing, he said, though this seemed like it wasn't the right thing to say as the junkie just got angrier and put the gun to Mark's head. Empty your pockets now, he shouted. I just don't get a break, Mark breathed out as he grabbed the gun and crushed it along with the man's hand. HHHHHH. The man screamed before Mark chopped the side of his neck, knocking him out cold. He then walked past the body and straight to the door of the bodega. I'm just gonna take this for free since I just saved your butt. Mark said, and the cashier just nodded rapidly. The bell rang out as Mark stepped through the door, and he shot into the sky, making his way to the apartment building. It wasn't too difficult to find as it was the building without a roof. Mark landed in front of it before opening the door and walking inside. He walked up to the elevator and pressed the button. He couldn't help but be surprised that the elevator was still working. He walked inside and pressed the button for the 4th floor. He remembered Harley saying that those were the only rooms she could rent out as the rest were in bad condition. As Mark stepped out of the elevator, he was greeted by a dark hallway, the only light being that from the elevator. While Mark couldn't see in the dark, his vision was a league above humans, something he guessed most races who evolved to fly would have. So he was able to see and smell the large amount of blood that had soaked into the carpet. What the hell happened here? He thought to himself as he stepped out of the elevator. Looking down each side of the hallway, he saw an open door on the left-hand side with light coming from inside the room. I hope Harley didn't go on a rampage or something, he thought to himself as he stalked towards the open door. As he opened the door, he felt himself walk through a tripwire, and then a knife attached to a metal pole dropped from above. However, it shattered against Mark's skin. Listen, Harley, I get you mad, but there's no need for that, Mark said as he continued walking inside. It seemed that the lights that he'd seen from outside were coming from candles that were littered all across the ground. Mark stepped into the living room, and what he saw almost made him sick. A man was pinned to the wall and was missing most of his skin, but he was hooked up to an 4-drip PP, please. The man struggled to say as his lips had been removed. His eyes had started to look shriveled from the lack of moisture, and the only thing keeping his innards in his body was the layer of skin that had been left on his stomach. Shit. Mark said to himself as he rushed around looking for a phone, as he didn't have one on him at the moment. When he found the landline, he picked it up, but there wasn't a dial tone. Someone had cut the wire. Ha chuch. Mark heard laughter from somewhere else in the apartment and frowned. He heard slow footsteps echo from where he just was coming towards him slowly until they abruptly stopped. A pale face with green hair and red lipstick peered around the corner and looked at Mark with a wide manic smile. Is this the young man you mentioned, OL Sport? He asked. Mark was confused for a moment as he didn't understand what he was talking about. Wes, please let me go, the man pinned to the wall behind him said. Mark looked back to the man peering around the corner like a child, and after taking a second look he recognized him. After all, there probably wasn't anyone in Gotham who wouldn't recognize the Joker. What are you doing here? Mark said in a serious tone. Joker stepped out from the hallway, revealing his body to Mark. His white shirt was stained red and his purple pants seemed to be dyed with blood as well, making them seem like a different color. I didn't expect my dear Harley's rebound to be such a handsome lad. Truly you know how to make an old man feel self-conscious. The Joker said dramatically as he sat down on a chair by the dining room table. Where is she? Mark asked bluntly as he crossed his arms. Haha, the Joker laughed at the question, banging his hand on the table. Mark had enough, and he zoomed in front of the Joker, grabbing him by the neck and slamming him against the wall. What's so funny? 'Cause from the way I'm seeing things, it doesn't look very amusing for you, Mark said as he tightened his grip around Joker's throat. It's just that I came here seeking Harley, and then when I didn't find her I wanted to find you because I thought you might know, but now you're here asking me if I know. He explained, but then stopped, and the Joker sighed. It's not funny when you have to explain the joke, he said almost solemnly. But then he regained his manic grin. I'm going to kill you now, Mark said bluntly. While he didn't much like killing people, the world would be a whole lot better off with men like him. Might get him into trouble with Batman and the League, but he didn't care. Plus it's not like they'd find out. Do I get to say any last words? He asked with a manic grin still on his face. Make them quick, Mark said as his fingers itched to crush his throat. Would you like to see something truly bizarre? The Joker simply said. What a waste of your dash. Boom. Mark was grabbed and flown out of the building. He struggled as whoever had grabbed him was slamming him through multiple buildings before skidding across the ground and into Central Park. You as good friend. Me take you alive to Joker. Mark pushed himself up from the ground to see a gray man wearing a Superman outfit, though the S was backwards. Mark did recall seeing on the news a few years ago that Superman had fought a clone of him or something. Listen, I don't want to hurt you, just let me get back to Joker. And hurt him, Mark said in what he thought was a reasonable way. You can trick Bizarro, me am not smart, he said with a grin on his face as he floated closer to Mark. Mark sighed, alright, let's go, he said before shooting towards Bizarro, slamming his fist into his face and sending the fake Superman careening across the ground and breaking through multiple trees. People started to scream and run, which caused a chain effect of mass hysteria. Mark seemingly only noticed the people for the first time now as he was focused on Bizarro, and he couldn't help the annoyance that rose in his chest. Why are there so many of them? They're always getting in the way. He thought to himself, though right after he had the thought he couldn't help but feel slightly concerned. However, he couldn't dwell on it much longer as Bizarro had flown straight at him, throwing his fist straight into Mark's jaw and knocking him to the ground. "You make Bizarro feel good," he said before slamming down on Mark with both fists like some sort of gorilla. Mark brought his legs up and kicked Bizarro off of him before following up with an uppercut to the chin. He then spun around, slamming his elbow to the side of his head, which sent him hurtling across the ground. Bizarro didn't seem much affected by Mark's blows, but each attack seemed to make him more and more frustrated as he kept on grunting and screaming. Mark ducked under a punch that Bizarro threw at him. It was pretty sloppy, but it was fast, and he could tell there was quite a bit of power behind it. Mark slammed his fist into Bizarro's gut, causing a shockwave, but it seemed to have no effect as Bizarro grinned, showing a mouthful of teeth before he brought his fist up and slammed it down on Mark at a speed faster than before. Mark crossed his arms together and managed to block the strike, but he was still sent hurtling across the ground. Mark flipped over midair and slammed his feet to the ground, pushing him up into the air, only to end up being tackled by Bizarro again. Mark brought his elbow down on his back multiple times, but he couldn't prevent Bizarro from flying him through multiple buildings again. "I didn't want to have to use this power again," Mark thought to himself. When he had found out that Billy, who turned out to be Shazam, died to give him his powers, it made him feel a bit sick. These powers belonged to a hero, and that's something he wasn't and would never be, so he wanted to try to avoid using them, though it seemed fate had other ideas. Mark summoned a red sphere in his hand and slammed it into Bizarro's back, making the clone scream as he let go of Mark and was sent shooting down to the earth. Shazam! A lightning bolt struck Mark, and he felt the familiar intoxicating power running through his body. His makeshift mask had been ripped off during the fight, so with a quick thought lightning danced around his body and formed a proper one. He'd almost forgotten how good this power had felt. "Me make you feel better," Bizarro shouted as he flew straight towards Mark. Mark caught him by the arms and threw him over his shoulder before shooting a stream of lightning at him right in the gut. Though surprisingly, the lightning bolt hit him and seemed to do nothing. This power had managed to hurt Omni-Man, someone who was on par with Superman, and yet this defective clone just shook it off. "What the foo!" Bizarro shot 2 rays of cold ice from his eyes, which caught Mark in the chest and started to freeze him and push him back. Mark blocked it with his hand as he flared lightning to dance and burn hot around his body, melting the ice off him. "I guess it's the old-fashioned way then," Mark said as he zoomed towards Bizarro. They both punched at each other, clashing their fists and causing a shockwave. Mark dodged and avoided each of Bizarro's swings. It was a lot easier now that he was in this form, as he was about the same speed, if not a bit faster, than Bizarro. Mark returned punch after punch at Bizarro, giving him a merciless beatdown, throwing his elbow into his jaw before grabbing him behind the neck and slamming his knee into his face multiple times. Each time Bizarro would be flung away, Mark would reach out with his power and pull him right back and continue pummeling him. Mark had to cover himself as Bizarro spewed a roaring inferno from his mouth that managed to singe him a little. He then flew over a punch that Bizarro aimed at him and grabbed the offending arm before dragging and spinning him around before launching him at the ground. Luckily, they were over Central Park, which was now mostly abandoned. Mark conjured another red sphere in his hand, but before he threw it at the still falling Bizarro, he ran his power through it, making it grow nearly 10 times bigger. It was now the size of a person in height, length, and width. He shot it down straight at Bizarro, a massive shockwave occurring as he did. Bizarro looked dumbfounded as he saw the large red sphere coming towards him. It was as if he was a deer caught in the headlights. Because of this, he wasn't defending himself when it hit him, and so he was hit by the full force and sent careening to the ground under its power. "This good. Me like," he shouted as he hit the ground, though he was being pushed further and further into the ground as he tried to push the sphere away. He started laughing joyfully as he felt it slowly stop and dissipate, though this was short-lived as Mark burst through feet first, causing the earth to tremble as he slammed into Bizarro. He felt some of the monster's ribs give out and snap as he did, making him smile. "I don't know how you were ever even a threat to Superman," Mark said with a grin as he grabbed Bizarro by the throat and dragged him out of the crater that he'd formed. "You are a disgusting creature, a mistake, and one that I'll correct," Mark growled out. Bizarro punched Mark in the stomach, making him grunt, but his grip didn't loosen. Instead, he brought Bizarro up and headbutted him over and over again until his nose was a deformed mess. Bizarro grabbed Mark's arm with both hands and managed to loosen his grip before shouting and shooting him full blast with his Arctic vision, freezing the area around them. He then punched Mark, shattering the ice and launching him to the ground, where he then mounted him and started pummeling him desperately. "You keep making me feel good more," he shouted as he tried to cave Mark's face in with his fists. Mark then caught both his fists one after the other and hovered out of the newly created crater with Bizarro in tow. He then slammed his knee into his gut, making him drop to his knees. Mark then brought both his fists up, clasped them together, and slammed them down on Bizarro's back while also using his power to amplify the weight in his hands. Boom! It sounded as if a bomb had gone off and Bizarro was left in a crater, though he was still getting up to fight Mark. "Me not help, Joker," he said in a markedly lower tone than before. Mark brushed off the lazy punch that Bizarro threw and grabbed him by the neck with one hand while he formed a large blue sphere with the other. He sent the sphere a few meters in front of himself where it stopped. Mark pushed off the ground and floated away from the sphere with Bizarro in his grasp. "You won't get in my way again," Mark said with disdain as he threw Bizarro at the sphere. The gray man screamed as his back was sucked in against the sphere. Mark then created a red sphere of around the same size, and with a callous look on his face, he sent it towards Bizarro, who screamed even louder as both spheres ground against his skin and crushed him. As both orbs dissipated, Bizarro fell to the ground with his costume mostly destroyed. Mark approached him before grabbing his head with both hands. "Mark, stop." He heard a voice call out. Mark looked up and saw Wonder Woman with what he guessed was her sister, as she looked remarkably similar to her. Mark gave them a bored look. "He's all power with no brain. He'll just get taken advantage of again. What I'm doing is mercy," Mark stated as he started to twist the creature's neck. He wouldn't listen to them. Why did he have to? They couldn't stop him. The lightning flowing through his body felt amazing, and he felt his muscles bulge and empower him as he twisted Bizarro's neck even further. All of a sudden he was kicked off Bizarro by Wonder Woman. "Mark, he's a creature of low intelligence. Killing him when he's being taken advantage of is wrong," she stated as she and Wonder Girl stood in front of Bizarro. Mark stood up with anger on his face. Rage was boiling up inside him, and he shot in front of Wonder Woman and threw a punch at her, one that she managed to block with her arm, though she was lifted off her feet and thrown back. Wonder Girl spun around and tried to kick him, but Mark leaned back, avoiding it, and then he grabbed her leg and slammed her on the ground before kicking her in the stomach and sending her through multiple trees. Though for the moment he was distracted, Wonder Woman was able to get her lasso around him. "Tell me the words you speak to transform," she said loudly. "Shazam!" Mark felt the intoxicating power melt away as he returned to his normal form. However, with that loss in power came a drastic difference in how he felt. "Why was I so mad?" he thought to himself. The way he had felt was slightly worrying to himself, as it mirrored the way his father was. "I'm sorry, Wonder Woman. I seem to have let myself get worked up," he said to her. Wonder Woman felt herself relax as she now knew she didn't have to fight him. She let him out of her also, and he stood up. "The Joker was here, though he will probably be long gone by now," Mark said with some annoyance. Crack! Mark didn't even need to look to know that Bizarro had just shot off into the sky. While he did admit he was out of control for a moment, he still gave Wonder Woman a look of annoyance, which she responded to by smiling sheepishly. He pinched the bridge of his nose before walking off. "Leave it alone, Mark, you've got shit to do," he said before he sped off. While Mark knew it was hopeless, he still flew back to the apartment where the Joker was. However, he was no longer there, just as he expected. What was worse, though, was that the man he had tortured was now dead. Mark had seen a lot worse when he'd fought his dad, but it still made him feel like throwing up. It did give him some comfort that he felt that way, as he didn't like how callous he felt in Central Park. Mark slapped his face and refocused before flying out of the window and up into the air. "Mark, where are you going?" Wonder Woman asked as she and her younger sister intercepted him. Mark sighed. "Not that it's any of your business, but I'm trying to find a friend. She took care of me after I was almost killed by Superman, but now she's gone missing," he explained. "Why did you not inform us? We could assist you in finding her," Wonder Woman said, trying to brush past the comment about Superman. Mark chuckled. "No thanks, you've got a dead guy in there that you should probably report," he said before shooting off into the sky and away from the Amazons. Diana sighed as she looked at Mark fly off. She had desperately wanted to try and get closer to him, but seemed to fail at every turn. She owed him a lot and wanted to repay him in any way she could. "Sister." The sound of her sister's voice snapped her out of her thoughts, and her gaze drifted away from where Mark had flown off to. Her sister had a sly look on her face. "Are you enamored with this man?" Donna asked in a teasing voice. Diana sighed before flying down to the building to assess the situation. "Oh, you are? Just wait until I tell Mother," Donna said as she laughed at her sister. Mark flew across the sky at his top speed, which he found had increased in recent months. "I guess there was a benefit to getting my butt beat so often," he thought to himself with some amusement. He quickly arrived in Kansas, and then at the home that Kara had made for them. He raised an eyebrow as he looked at the poorly repaired holes that had been made when Superman had tackled him out of the house. He walked around his house suspecting the person he wanted to see would be there rolling around in the dirt, but to his surprise, she wasn't. He did give out an appreciative whistle as he saw how well his garden was doing. It seemed like everything he had planted was grown and doing incredibly. All the fruit looked ripe and delicious, and the vegetables were bountiful. Even the flowers looked amazing. Mark then saw a familiar sight sitting at a tree that had a single golden apple spouting from one of its branches. "Hey, Swampy," Mark said, unsure of himself, as that was most definitely not the creature's real name. "I just wanted to thank you for saving me. Ivy said you fished me out of the sea and brought me to her, which you didn't need to do. So thanks," he said with an awkward smile. The green monster looked up at Mark and gave him a heartwarming smile before reaching out and patting him on the head. Mark took that as no problem, and just returned the smile before heading for his house. Before he even opened the door, he heard crying, and he very nearly considered not opening it and just leaving. Please let it be a sad film, he thought to himself before opening the door. The image that greeted him made Mark wonder why whatever gods existed had cursed him to live a life where he encountered such crazy people. In the center of the living room, Poison Ivy lay on the ground with a dozen empty bottles of wine as she wept. She was also naked, but that wasn't too unusual when it came to Ivy. As soon as Ivy looked up and saw Mark, she scowled before leaning up on her arm and throwing a bottle of wine at him, one he deflected away with a gesture. "Come to gloat," she shouted before throwing another at him. Mark pinched the bridge of his nose. "I was looking for Harley. Has she been here?" he asked. Ivy stood up from the ground, and a mocking smile appeared on her face. "Trouble in paradise already? Ha! I knew Harley would realize her new boy toy couldn't measure up to yours truly," she spouted. Mark just looked at her with an already tired expression. "Ivy, I'm going to ask you this once, and if you don't answer, I'm going to give up immediately and leave," he said in a serious tone. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Ivy crossed her arms and gave him a look that Mark thought would suit a 5-year-old better than it did her. "Harley hasn't called me in weeks. She hasn't visited. You stole her off me. But I'll get her back, you'll see," Ivy shouted. "I haven't seen Harley either. I thought she might be here, but the only one in the house was you," he explained. "You could at least try and cover up your disappointment," Ivy said in a whiny tone. "After the day I've had, I really can't," Mark replied. "So you're saying you haven't seen Harley or spoken to her in a few weeks?" Mark tried to confirm. Ivy nodded. "She isn't in her apartment. She isn't here, and Joker is also currently looking for her." Shit. Batman was currently on the watchtower. While he knew he could leave, he wanted to regain the trust of his friends and comrades, something he knew would take a while. He'd also been talking with Black Canary, something he'd found exceedingly difficult, but it was at the behest of the other Leaguers. He knew Dick, Tim, Barbara, and Damian could handle Gotham while he was gone, but he still had trouble letting go and giving them the reins. He still saw it as his city, something he'd only just begun to recognize. However, in typical Batman fashion, he didn't allow himself to relax. Something had been making waves in the underworld, and the more Batman investigated it, the more concerned he became. A huge event seemed to be taking place, and from what Batman could theorize, it was an auction. But it seemed it was a lot larger in scale than the previous black market auctions that he'd encountered before. He'd need to investigate more. He sent Dick and Tim to investigate the usual villains in Gotham. Hopefully, that would yield some answers. He didn't like being in the dark, especially when it came to something as big as this. The Justice League's heavy hitters were down, and they were completely ignorant of this new upcoming threat. Batman leaned back in his seat as he ran a search on all of his rogues in Gotham. Nearly all of them were gone, and he had no idea where they were. Even the heads of crime families weren't present. What event could be so big that it attracts such a large group of people, he thought to himself. Batman knew about the underground auction that occurred a few times every decade, but he discounted it. The ones in the past 10 years had not attracted nearly as many criminals. But if it was another underground auction, then Batman needed to figure out why it was attracting such a large number of clientele. What could they possibly be selling? He thought to himself. On top of this, he was still trying to track down Omni-Man, which he had a little more luck with, as there had been various sightings of 2 flying figures in Mexico. While this could be dismissed as just another person with the ability to fly, one of the figures had only one arm, which makes the fact that it's Nolan more likely. Batman contemplated what he'd do when he found him. Would Mark be able to fight him again? He wondered. While his actions said yes, Batman wasn't sure if things would be different this time. "Bruce, you've been working for the past 2 weeks non-stop. You need to take a break," Black Canary said from behind him. She had been helping around the watchtower since the incident with Nolan, as a lot of the main forces of the League were afraid something like this could happen again. Batman didn't even look back at her. Of all the times to take a break, now isn't one of them. He simply stated before going back to work. Black Canary sighed as she walked behind Bruce and put an arm on his shoulder. You're not alone, Bruce. The fact you forgot that is what led you to this situation. She said bluntly. I know, but with injuries affecting our founding members, I can't afford to take breaks, especially not when something big is on the horizon. He replied. Bruce, your most valuable asset to the League is your mind. How can we make use of it when you've gone days without any sleep and weeks without any real rest? She said as she spun his chair around. I appreciate your concern, Black Canary, but this isn't the therapist's office and I have work to do. He said, spinning his chair back around to the screen and continuing with his work. Black Canary breathed heavily before letting go of Batman's shoulder. However, before she left, she turned around. Bruce, be careful, trying so hard to fix your mistakes might lead you to make even more. She said before leaving. 1 week later, Bruno Mannheim stood on stage in front of a huge audience. The entire space looked like an old theater. The space in front of Bruno was filled with all kinds of ruffians and criminals. Some were familiar, such as Firefly and Clayface. However, most were unfamiliar, as they were criminals, rebels, and other such scum from around the world. They'd all come for one thing, and that was the pre-auction showcase. A lot of the products that would be shown would have a starting price ranging from the thousands to the billions. This showcase would allow money to be transferred and for the buyers to be ready for the real auction. At the sides of the auction room were private boxes for the ultra-wealthy, people such as Lex Luthor, Maxwell Lord, and even the leader of Bialia himself. Bruno smirked as he saw the large attendance in front of him. It was even more than they'd estimated. Welcome, my friends. He boomed out to the audience as he opened his large arms outwards. It truly does bring a smile to my face to see so many criminals and degenerates in one place, though what makes me more happy is to see the money you've brought through our doors. He shouted out, much to the laughter of the crowd before him. Slaves, both male, female and other, alien and terrestrial technology, magical artifacts, weapons both biological and energy-based. Bruno listed off some of the items that would listed up for auction. But for now I shall be presenting to you some of what we imagine will be our most expensive and most popular items. He said before pressing a button in his hand. The curtain behind him opened, and 2 attendants brought something out and placed it on a pedestal. Bruno walked toward the pedestal and whipped off the cover. In a clear glass box there was a vial of gray sludge that seemed to shift between solid and liquid states. This is a perfected strand of the Doomsday virus. Anyone who consumes it will become the same, if not stronger, than the monster that was responsible for killing Superman, Bruno explained, much to the awe of the crowd. The grin on his face stretched even wider, seeing the greed in the eyes of everyone before him. He'd have to thank his benefactor for providing this for him. Bruno then placed the cloth back onto the glass case and signaled the attendants to take it away. As they left, 2 others appeared bringing another box onto the pedestal. The crowd waited in absolute anticipation. The first item was something that could turn a nobody into one of the most powerful people on the planet, so what could be next? Bruno whipped off the cloth and a shiny platinum stone was in the glass container. While most looked around confused, there was one person in a private box that had his blood boil at the sight of the item. This may appear to you as nothing more than a shiny rock, but do not let looks deceive you, my friends, for this is much, much more, Bruno said with a grin on his face. This is platinum kryptonite, however. This will not harm Superman like the regular old green. What it will do, however, is give all the powers of a Kryptonian to a human. He said, shouting the last part excitedly. The crowd went absolutely wild at the item on display, so much that the guards stationed at the foot of the stage and at the sides all unholstered their weapons. However, they calmed down when Bruno raised his hand demanding silence. So my friends, if you wish for power but are too vain to turn yourself into a monster, perhaps becoming the next Superman is the way to go. He said with a grin before waving off the attendants, who grabbed the box and took it off stage. Now this item is a mystery to even myself, Bruno said as a smaller glass container was brought on stage. Inside was what looked like a dark purple necklace that was in the shape of a face. The face had 6 red gemstones which were used as eyes and horns coming out the sides. The only information I was able to gather about this magical artifact is that if the right conditions are fulfilled, the pendant will transport you to another dimension where a god will grant any single wish you may have. The crowd wasn't nearly as impressed with this one, as they all gave skeptical glances at the pendant, not believing in its abilities, though that was just the non-magicals. Those who dabbled in sorcery that had come were positively giddy when they saw it. Now I have one last item to show you, and it is by far my favorite. I wouldn't be surprised if this were to empty the bank accounts of even the richest people here. Much to everyone's surprise, it wasn't an object that was brought on stage, but a person. She was dressed in a red lace bra with matching underwear and stockings going up her legs. She had long ginger hair that had been freshly cleaned. She had a dead expression on her face as she was led up to the stage next to Bruno. This here is a girl that can manipulate matter and energy at the subatomic level. For all of you idiots in the crowd, that means she could turn one thing into something else. And for those who don't understand that, she can take an apple and change it into gold. She can take a rubber ball and create a uranium core. She is extremely gifted, which was why we had to break her, unfortunately, though she'll still listen to simple orders when given. Bruno explained, once again exciting the crowd. Her name is Eve and she is going to sell for a lot of money, Bruno said while laughing almost uncontrollably. While Bruno spoke, unbeknownst to him, there was someone in the crowd watching and waiting for the right time to strike. Unfortunately for Nolan, he didn't find it, as what he was looking for was not in the items that were being displayed. And he couldn't risk starting a fight in a room full of thousands of villains. Nolan was wearing a dark hood as he watched the items being brought up to the stage. He had to admit some of them were indeed interesting. Especially the Doomsday virus. He remembers fighting that creature with Superman. It had almost killed him, and had it not been for Superman he might have died. "Papa, do we strike now?" Oliver whispered from next to him, as his young 15-year-old son looked up at him and clenched his fists. Nolan put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Not yet, son, but soon," he replied with a grin on his face. "I already said I didn't find shit in Boston, Ivy." Mark shouted at Ivy as he was grabbing clothes from his room in Gotham and shoved them into a bag. "Well, maybe you didn't look enough, you dumbass," Ivy shouted back from the kitchen. Mark groaned as he hit his head against the wall, wishing he could feel the pain of it, as it might overcome the headache Ivy was giving him. He'd spent a week with her, and he was already considering going back to his dad and letting him take over the planet. He was just glad that his mom wasn't home at the moment, as he didn't want to have to deal with her questions about why a notorious villain was in her apartment. Mark's new phone buzzed, and he grabbed it out of his pocket. "Kara, hey, I haven't seen you today, is everything okay? By the way, I enjoyed dinner with your mom yesterday." Mark: "Hey Kara. It's good to hear from you, and yeah, I'm fine, just a bit busy running errands for Batman." He sent a message back before putting his phone back into his pocket. He didn't like lying to Kara, but he can't imagine much of the Justice League would approve of him trying to save Harley. "Did she have any safe houses that you knew about?" Mark asked as he walked out of his bedroom with a bag slung over his shoulder. As he walked into the kitchen, he saw Ivy in there rooting around his fridge. "Sure, help yourself, no need to ask," he said as he watched her peek her head over the side with an expression of annoyance on her face. "I'm hungry," she shouted in an annoyed voice. "Yeah, well, don't eat all my food, I'm hungry too, you know," Mark said as he walked over to the fridge to see what Ivy was taking. In her arms was a whole chicken she had taken out. "You can't be serious," he said as he looked down at Ivy. She looked up at him incredulously. "What? I burn through more calories than the average human," she stated. "I sincerely doubt that," Mark replied as he grabbed the chicken from her. "Hey, I was going to eat that," she shouted as she tried grabbing it back, but Mark held out his hand and pushed him away. "I'm the one that's been flying around to all these different places. Eat something else," he said as he walked over to the oven. "But there's no other meat in there, it's only vegetables," she whined. "Why don't you just eat the vegetables then?" Mark said as he turned the oven on. "Why don't you just eat other humans then?" she said mockingly as she crossed her arms. "It is not the same thing. You're a human, you're just green," Mark said, slightly unsure of his own words. "So if that chicken could talk to you, would you still eat it?" she asked him. Mark looked at her with a raised eyebrow, then looked down at the chicken in his hand and sighed. "I get your point," he said in a defeated voice. Poison Ivy smiled victoriously as she walked forward to claim her prize, only to be stopped by Mark again. "The sun's out. Enjoy your meal," he said with a smirk before pushing her back. "You're such a bastard," Ivy shouted before walking out of the kitchen to sit by the window. Mark just chuckled as he put the chicken in the oven. Is there anywhere else Harley might go if she was trying to avoid the Joker? He asked from the kitchen. "No, if she needed a safe place, she'd just call me," Ivy replied. "At this point, I suppose we have to accept she's been taken," Mark said as he walked out of the kitchen and sat on the sofa. "Which wouldn't have happened if you hadn't left her sleeping on a bus station bench," Ivy said chidingly. "Give me a break, my dad, who I hadn't seen for over 10 years, was on TV fighting the Justice League, who then fought me, by the way. Also, you're welcome for saving the planet from a potential alien occupation, Mark said in a slight pout. Oh, you're a regular old superhero. Let me just try and forget the first time we met Superman tackled you and beat your butt. Poison Ivy said with a laugh at the end. Mark sighed, that was a misunderstanding. Listen, we are getting distracted, we need to find out who took Harley. Could it have been the League of Assassins? You mentioned they attacked you earlier in the day. Ivy asked. Mark thought for a moment before shaking his head. No, they wanted whatever Harley had on her, they didn't care much for taking her anywhere. He said. Had on her. Ivy said with slight confusion. She had a shiny stone that she'd been keeping. She said that it was one of the last jobs she and the Joker did, Mark explained. You could have mentioned that before. Ivy said as she pulled out her phone from between her cleavage. Why do you even have that? Mark asked, shut up. She said as she started looking through her phone. She then got up from her seat on the windowsill and sat next to Mark. Around 4 years ago I was invited to this event. It was called the Underground Auction. They had a bunch of cool stuff there, though nothing that could interest me, Ivy mentioned as she showed Mark her invitation that she'd received a few months prior. What makes you think they'd take her? Mark asked. Well, if the League of Assassins were after whatever that rock was, then it's likely the people who run the auction would be too. They also like to traffic people, which would explain why they took her, Ivy explained. Mark snickered. Not really who would want to buy Harley. He said almost automatically. Poison Ivy sighed. She can be a bit of a handful, but she does have a way of growing on you. A small smile made its way onto Mark's face. She does. He managed to catch Ivy wiping her eyes, so he put his hand on her knee. Don't worry, we will get her back. Do you know where the underground auction is going to be held? Mark asked. Poison Ivy nodded. It's included in the invitation. She replied. Mark nodded, though before he could say anything else his phone beeped again. So he took it out of his pocket and saw that he'd received another message from Kara. Kara, hey, come back already. I've got a surprise for you. Mark started to laugh nervously. Maybe Harley can wait a bit longer. He thought to himself with a lecherous smile on his face. Please stop smiling like that, you're making me feel unsafe, Ivy said with a disturbed look on her face. Mark rolled his eyes as he stood up. We will sneak into the underground auction tomorrow. I just remembered I have some stuff to do. Mark said a little suspiciously. Poison Ivy narrowed her eyes at him. Why don't we leave now? Surely you don't have something more important to do. She said slowly as she stood up. Ding, I guess you're right. Well, the chicken is ready. Why don't you go get it while I set the table? Mark said with an apologetic smile. Ivy looked at him with even more suspicion. This whole week all he had done was steal food and laugh in her face, and now he was offering to share. However, the chicken smelled too good for her to care, and so she walked past Mark into the kitchen. Whoosh! Ivy heard the sound of wind moving really quickly, and she stopped moving. Mark, if I turn around and look in the living room and you're not there, then I swear to the green you're dead. She said before turning around and looking back inside. Mother few dash, Watchtower. You know this really wasn't the surprise I had in mind when you texted me, Mark said with apparent disappointment. Kara just gave him an apologetic smile. That surprise is still gonna happen, don't worry. Just a tiny little meeting beforehand. She said, holding her finger and thumb up together. Mark sighed before looking at the other people there. The meeting room he'd been led to had Superboy, Wonder Woman, Wonder Girl, Nightwing, Starfire, and Batman. There were a few others that Mark didn't recognize, but he didn't care much and sat down wanting to get this over with. We appreciate you coming, Mark, Diana said with a kind smile. I didn't really have much choice since I was tricked, but we can ignore that for now, Mark replied before looking toward Batman, who sat opposite him. What do you want? Though just to let you know, I'll probably decline. I'm quite busy at the moment, Mark said casually. Looking for Harley Quinn, Batman said bluntly, shocking those at the table, apart from Kara and Corey, as Mark had already told them what had happened after Superman punched a hole in his stomach. Why would you be looking for that maniac? Dick shouted. Out of all the people here, the Bat family knew just how dangerous Harley was, especially when paired with the Joker. That maniac took care of me after Boy in Blue punched a hole in my stomach and threw me into the sea, Mark said bluntly, silencing Nightwing. Mark then looked back towards Batman. You have an issue with me looking for her? He asked, though he didn't much care about the answer. I don't, in fact. The job I have for you will benefit you in this regard, Batman stated. Mark raised his eyebrows in surprise, but quickly schooled his expression. I'm listening. He simply said. Batman stood up and slid a metal disc into the center of the table. A holographic image then appeared of a large palace in the desert. However, calling it a palace would be a disservice. The entire compound was more the size of a large town. This is the palace of Roman Harjavti, the dictator of the nation of Byalia. Batman stated. These past few weeks I've been researching the disappearance of villains across various cities. At first I wasn't sure why they all seemed to leave, but I managed to discover the reason why. He continued. The image on the screen switched to a picture of a large man with a receding hairline in a suit. This is Bruno Mannheim. He's the leader of Intergang. A number of years ago he started the underground auction where they'd sell the alien technology they acquired. However, in recent years the scale of the auction has only increased. He explained. This year the auction has promised to be the biggest it ever, Batman said as he sat back down in his seat. Mark leaned back in his seat. So, go take your little club and bust the place up. Mark suggested, but Batman simply shook his head. Intergang and the auction are currently protected by the Byalian government. Any overt movement against them could cause an international incident. He explained. So what do you want from me? Mark asked. Nightwing, Superboy and Wonder Girl will be disguising themselves as criminals and infiltrating the auction. I'd like for you to join them. He replied. Mark raised an eyebrow. Only 4 of us? Against thousands of criminals. Mark said with a snicker. You won't be fighting anyone. You'll be finding out where they store the product and recover them, or at the very least destroy them. And it's not just 4 of you. The 5th member will be joining you when you leave, Batman stated. While he didn't want to do it this way as he had no way of knowing what was there, this situation had placed him in a bind. The list of members he could use that were both relatively unknown to the public, as well as available to do what could turn out to be a dangerous mission was very short, which was why he needed Mark, as at the moment he was one of the strongest beings on the planet. I'll provide equipment and anything else that's needed for the mission, and of course you'll be compensated as per our deal. Batman continued. Mark didn't see any downside to the mission. He was going to have to do this anyway, but at least he now had backup. He wasn't too worried. He was sure he could escape if he needed to, though if he had the element of surprise he could carve a large chunk out of them. Fine, we have a deal. He said in agreement as he stood up. You'll move out in a few days, Batman stated before standing up and leaving the room, effectively ending the meeting. Diana gave Mark a smile as she left the room, though the same couldn't be said for his new teammates who either scowled at him or ignored him. Don't worry about them, Mark. I'm sure they'll come to like you just as much as I do. Kara said as she hugged the side of his body. Mark laughed nervously as he thought about Superboy and Nightwing liking him as much as Kara. I hope not. He said quietly enough for Kara not to hear. It is good to see you, Honored One. I've been most desperate to see you again, Corey said as she approached Mark with a wide smile on her face. Mark could see she was breathing heavily and perspiring. A bead of sweat ran down her neck where it ran between her breasts. Kara looked up at Corey as her nose wrinkled. She then looked down towards Corey's groin and her eyes widened. She's practically gushing. She thought to herself. She involuntarily hugged Mark even tighter than she was before. While she knew Corey liked Mark, this reaction was insane. Mark laughed nervously again. Please, Corey, call me Mark. It's good to see you too. He said as he scratched the back of his head. Ah yes, I forgot that is how you wish to be referred to, Honored Mark. Perhaps you'd like to administer the punishment now. She said as she turned around and put both of her hands on the table and bent over slightly. Corey. Kara shouted in surprise as she let go of Mark and walked over to her friend. We need to talk now. She whispered loudly before dragging her towards the door. She looked around and smiled apologetically at Mark. Sorry, Mark, it looks like the surprise will have to wait. See you later. She said before walking through the door and leaving Mark alone. Harley sighed as she lay on her side. She'd started picking the beads off of her outfit and was trying to throw them into Killer Frost's mouth as she was asleep. She had been slowly going insane with boredom as she had spent most of her time in this cage. Well, at least more insane than she usually was. The only people she had for company were a miserable wench and a girl that didn't say anything. She really hoped that Ivy or Mark would have busted her out by now, but it looks like they either couldn't find her or didn't care. I tell you what, Cassie, I'm gonna give Mark a hell of a beating when I next see him. She said, though her voice wasn't very enthusiastic. She stopped trying to throw beads at Killer Frost and sat up before tucking her legs to her chest. I really miss them. She said as she let her head fall to her lap. Tears started to fall from her eyes as emotions started to overwhelm her. She felt a hand touch her and she looked up. Cassandra had put a reassuring hand on her shoulder, which made Harley smile. Yeah, I don't know why I'm so emotional all of a sudden. I hope I'm not pregnant. She said jokingly as she wiped her eyes. The door to the warehouse slammed open as a large forklift drove inside slowly with a large metal box that kept on rattling. Next to it was a whole squad of guards as well as Deathstroke and Ravager. They all had their guns pointed at the crate as it was moved and placed down. Shut the hell up. Harley shouted as the cage wouldn't stop rattling. Deathstroke turned around and saw Harley, then laughed. I wouldn't go agitating it, girl. From what I've been told, inside there is a creature that could rip off Superman's arm with just its teeth. Bullshit. Harley spat out before throwing a bead at Deathstroke, though the mercenary caught it in his hand before inspecting it and dropping it to the ground. Enjoy your relative freedom while you can. A week from now you'll be someone's shadow-inking slave or worse. He said with a chuckle before turning around and leaving. Bastard. She shouted before she was distracted by the loud roaring coming from the metal box. Harley leaned back against her cage. If no one was coming to get him, then she'd need to figure out a way to escape herself. Kara took her friend by the arm and led her back to her quarters on the watchtower. Friend Kara, is everything okay? You seem to be quite agitated. Corey said as they entered her room, and Kara sat Corey on her bed. Kara realized that she was quite agitated as her eyes were glowing red. She calmed herself down by rubbing her belly, feeling her baby's heart pulse through her hands. She then refocused on why she was here. Corey, you need to stop what you're doing with Mark, she said sternly. Corey looked at her with a slightly confused look. What do you mean, friend Kara? Did I do something offensive? She asked. Kara huffs. Every time you get close to Mark or even talk about him, I can smell the arousal coming from between your legs. I could practically hear your coochie pulsing when you spoke to him earlier, and even now this room is full of your smell, she complained. Corey giggled brightly. My apologies, friend Kara, I did not know my scent was bothering you so much, she said apologetically. It doesn't bother me. I just... Corey inspected her facial expressions carefully. Could it be you are jealous, friend Kara? She asked as she stood up. Kara crossed her arms and a sour expression appeared on her face. Corey smiled as she walked behind Kara and wrapped her arms around Kara. Are you and Honored Mark engaged in a relationship? She asked as she put her chin on Kara's shoulder. Kara cut herself off before she could finish, as she'd never really thought about what Mark and herself were to each other. The circumstances that brought them together were completely screwed up, and she didn't even know if what she felt was a result of her out-of-control hormones or actual affection. I'm not sure, she ended up saying. Corey could hear the distress in her voice when Kara said that, and so she hugged her tighter. Do not worry, friend Kara, I will not attempt to steal Mark away, but I simply cannot help myself around him, Corey said wistfully. Everything I've heard about Viltrumites being heroes who only conquer planets to help them or to rid them of tyrants was proven untrue in the last few months, she said as she detached herself from Kara. It's as if finding out your childhood heroes were always villains, she said as she wiped her eyes. So to find that there is one such Viltrumite that lives up to your expectations, I find it hard to control myself, she explained. Kara sighed and gave her friend a smile. I suppose that makes sense, she said. I also want him to impregnate me. Kara walked past Corey and left the room, leaving Corey looking a bit confused. Why did you call me here? Mark asked as he stood in front of Batman, who was currently typing on a computer terminal. For a moment Batman didn't answer him, but after a while he stood up from his seat and turned around to look at Mark. I still don't trust you, he said bluntly to Mark. However, before Mark could speak he held his hand up. But it seems my judgment as of late is not reliable, as your actions have shown you'll do what's right when it counts, he stated. Follow me, he said as he walked past him. Mark followed as he honestly had nothing better to do at the moment. Your father is free, and I have to assume he has contacted the Viltrumite Empire. When they send reinforcements, then only a handful of people will be able to stop them, one of which is you, Batman stated as he walked with Mark. Listen, you don't need to keep worrying over if I'm about to turn cloak and join the Empire. I'm a lot more human than I am Viltrumite, Mark said in a tired voice. That's not what I'm trying to say, Batman replied. From the information we managed to extract from Nolan 10 years ago, we managed to learn a lot about Viltrumites, he stated. Kryptonians get their power from a yellow star. The light empowers their cells, which gives them their abilities. Viltrumites, however, are born with all of their abilities, he continued. What are you getting at? Mark asked. While a Viltrumite's muscles are composed of ultra-dense tissue, they can still be torn, and so can get stronger, whether by fighting or training, Batman replied as they came to a stop outside of the room. Batman typed a code into the console next to the door, and it opened, leading into what Mark saw was a state-of-the-art gym. The gym looked like it could be straight out of the future. Some of the machines he didn't even recognize. This is the Watchtower Gym, a combined effort between Cyborg, Mr. Terrific and I. Batman stated. Seems pretty redundant for most of your members, Mark said as he looked around. There are quite a number of heroes who can still benefit from physical training, and those that can't still benefit from the psychological effect that can come from exercising. Batman explained. Psychological. Batman nodded. Have you never been to the gym purely out of the frustration you feel and want to work off? He asked. Mark nodded. Most of the time he worked out in Ted's gym was because he felt frustrated. He could definitely see why heroes would need a way to burn off some steam like that. So you're saying if I work out I'll get stronger? Mark said, to which Batman nodded. Those weight machines make use of small versions of the artificial gravity we have on the Watchtower, as well as specially designed magnetic generators. The treadmill is a similar design to one the Flash has used, and that punching bag is made of the same material we used to imprison Nolan. Batman explained as he gestured to the different machines. There is also a chamber back there that can simulate heavier gravity. It should help you with increasing your flight speed. He continued to explain. Mark looked around as he walked and picked up one of the dumbbells that was on a rack. It felt about the same to him as lifting a match. Was not all of this are designed with you in mind. There are still a number of people in the league who do not have enhanced strength. Batman told him. Mark nodded before putting it down. I assume you're telling me all this for a reason? Mark asked. The likelihood of a Viltrumite invasion had become a probable event, and I know you'll fight when the time comes. This is just giving you the tools to make survival more likely. Batman stated. You have 5 days until you head out. Make use of them. Batman said before turning on his heels and leaving the gym. With Batman gone, Mark wandered around the gym looking at the equipment. If he was honest with himself, very little looked familiar. He guessed he'd have to figure it out. One apparatus looked quite interesting. It had 2 pieces of metal connected to each other. Each piece of metal was rectangular and around 7 feet high and 4 feet wide. The poles that connected them both looked like coils. Mark ducked underneath and inside, where he leaned back against one of the metal plates. User detected. Please select weight, a max I guess? Mark replied. What he didn't expect was the other sheet of metal to come slamming into him. It would have smashed into him had he not brought his hands up in time and stopped it. Most things that came at him at that speed would have smashed across his body, but this metal didn't even have a dent. Not only that, but Mark actually felt like he couldn't push back. He was stuck. What the hell? He said to himself. Computer reset weight. A voice said from behind him. Mark took a deep breath as he rolled his wrists. He looked over to his right where the voice came from and was surprised to see Superboy, who was wearing shorts and a tank top. You shouldn't start on this machine. It's basically a railgun that you do press-ups with. Connor said before heading over to another machine. Thanks. Mark said, unsure of what else to say. He did throw Superboy across the state and then beat him a second time, so he didn't exactly think they were friends. Connor didn't say anything else and tapped on a panel near the machine. He then stood inside of it and reached up to these handles, so it made him look like he was making a Y shape. He started to pull them down like he was doing a cable workout, but to Mark's surprise he was struggling a bit with each rep. Mark got out of what he now knew was a functioning railgun, which seemed a little overboard when considering it was basically used as a bench press. So you come here a lot? Mark asked as he walked to an identical machine near Connor. Yeah. Anyone else come here? Yeah. You do anything else here besides lift? Yeah. You don't like me much? Yeah. Look, I'm sorry I whipped you across the state and then beat you again. It's hard controlling your strength sometimes, and I thought you were at least as strong as me. Mark said in a poor attempt to reconcile. However, all it did was cause Connor's eyebrows to twitch. Connor stops pulling and steps out of the machine. Listen, you must have the wrong idea, 'cause you're definitely not stronger than me. He said, shoving his finger into Mark's chest. Mark laughs mockingly. I knocked you on your butt multiple times. He replied. 'Cause you can fly, and your other weird powers, but pure strength I win. Connor said with an arrogant grin on his face. Is that right? Mark said as he stepped closer to Connor. Yeah, it is. Replied Connor. Oh. Mark groaned as he pulled the weight, doing his 1000th rep. Connor, who was on the same one, was equally struggling. They had both competed on every machine in the gym apart from the railgun, and neither one of them had slowed down yet. You ready to give up? Mark shouted at Connor, who growled. Not on your life. Connor replied as he kept lifting. Though a couple of thousand reps later they both started to see the futility of what they were doing. While it was giving them a good workout, they could still keep going. This is starting to seem pointless, Mark said as he pulled his machine down once more. Connor looked at Mark and nodded at him in agreement. Gravity room, it's built like a prison cell for sparring, he stated. Mark let go of the machine with a grin on his face. Let's go, he said before taking off his shirt and following Connor into the chamber. Connor went up to the console and started typing away. The room suddenly went red and Mark felt the increased gravity hit him, though it wasn't anything bad. As Connor slid his finger upwards, Mark could feel the increased weight on his body. It felt similar to when he'd use his power, so it was pretty easy to get used to no flying, no powers, just strength, Connor said as he turned around and looked at Mark, cracking his neck. Fine by me, Mark replied with a smirk on his face. Connor roared as he lunged toward Mark with his fist drawn back. Mark brought his hand up to defend himself from the blow, but he didn't take into account the decreased reaction time, meaning Connor's blow struck him right in the face, sending him straight into the chamber wall and then into the floor. Mark got up before rushing forward, throwing his own punch at Connor that he sidestepped. Mark then hooked his hand around Connor's neck and dragged him right into a headbutt. Mark then deflected the wild blow that Connor sent out and slammed his elbow into the same spot his head had hit. What's the matter, Superboy? Not feeling very strong today? Mark mocked, though it would last for long, as Connor pushed off his feet, lunged towards Mark again, tackling him to the ground. They struggled for dominance as they rolled around, though eventually Connor got up and grabbed Mark by the leg before swinging him at the wall. However, before he could even hit the ground, Connor was charging again and shoulder-checked him straight into the wall again, making Mark splutter and cough up a bit of blood. I guess if you can't fly you wouldn't be much use, would you? Connor said as he stood above Mark. Mark smiled as he pushed himself up against the wall. I'm just going east against you. No use making you cry for the third time, he said before launching off the ground, taking him and Connor into the air, where he slammed his fist into Connor's face multiple times before spinning around and kicking him into the ground. Mark then landed feet first into Connor's stomach, which he really felt. Mark let Connor get up as he stood with his arms crossed. Connor raised his fists as he got into a rudimentary boxing stance. He got closer to Mark before launching a combination of a few jabs before trying to hook his jaw. Mark bobbed his head left and right before leaning back to avoid the jab. He then went in for a straight, which caught him by surprise. Mark then caught the next fist he sent before sending his into Connor's stomach and then slamming Connor's own fist into his face. Mark then booted Connor straight to the back wall, where it took him a few seconds to get up. You gonna give up yet? Mark asked. Never, Connor replied. 6 hours later, Kara walked into the gym to find it empty. When she asked Batman where Mark was and he told her the gym, she expected to see him straight away, but it seems like he left already. At least that's what Kara thought until she heard the loud bang coming from the gravity room. With a frown on her face, she walked towards the chamber, growing more and more concerned as she did. When she opened the door and stepped into the chamber, she was immediately met with the form of Connor being thrown right at her. Lifting up her, and she backhanded him out of the way, sending him into the adjacent wall. Kara? What are you doing here? Mark asked. Most of Mark's outfit was torn, and he was covered in multiple bruises and cuts, the worst of which were in his face, though they'd heal. It's dinner time. I thought you'd want me to call you so we could have it together, Kara explained. Mark could tell by her expression that she wasn't happy about being forgotten. Sure, let's go, he said with a nervous smile. Mark looked over to Superboy, who was equally as bruised as he was. Same time tomorrow? He asked. Yeah, he simply replied. Mark's whole body felt sore. He hadn't felt like this in such a long time. He had forgotten how good it felt to have a proper workout. Mark walked over towards Kara, and they left the room with Mark grabbed his t-shirt on the way out. He was definitely going to sleep well tonight. 5 days later, Mark yawned as he stood with Kara in the hangar bay. Donna, Connor and Dick stood with him as they waited for Batman, who was uncharacteristically late. I told you we could have slept in more, he whispered to Kara, though Kara only hit his shoulder and told him to be quiet, as she wasn't the only one in the room with super hearing, which was proven by the small smile Connor had on his face, making Kara blush. However, before anything else could happen, the door to the hangar opened and Batman walked in, with what Mark saw as a green woman with red hair behind him. In the corner of his eye, he saw Connor stiffen and then purposely look away. This is Miss Martian. She will be the 5th member of your group, Batman stated. What, we couldn't get Martian Manhunter? No offense, Mark said. None taken, Miss Martian said with a smile. He's busy, Batman simply replied. Miss Martian is just as capable as he is. Her powers make her particularly suited to this type of mission, as well as the ship she uses. Batman explained. It's good to see you, Megan. Dick said with a smile, ignoring Batman and Mark's quibbling. Yeah, we thought you wouldn't be coming back so soon. Donna said as she walked forward and hugged the girl. Well, I did have a few more months left, but it seems this mission is important. Don't worry, I won't let you down. Miss Martian said determinedly. She then looked over to Connor, who hadn't said a single word to her, nor even looked at her. Hey, Connor. She said tentatively. Are we starting the mission yet, or what? Connor asked impatiently. Batman nodded. You'll take Miss Martian's bioship to the pre-selected coordinates. I've managed to organize you some equipment that will help you blend in. Don't forget your mission is to search and destroy if you cannot recover. Batman stated. Batman then looked at Dick. I don't need to tell you how important this is, do I? He said in a serious tone. No. Dick replied. Then move out. Batman stated before turning around and leaving. Miss Martian reached into her pocket and took out what looked like a small ball. She floated it to the middle of the hangar where it transformed into a ship. That's pretty cool. Mark thought to himself. Let's go, guys. Miss Martian said brightly as she floated over to her ship that opened as she got closer. Dick and Donna followed after her, with Connor reluctantly trailing behind. I wish I could come with you, Kara said in a quiet voice. Mark pulled her close and kissed her on the head. I won't be long. This'll be easy, after all I'm probably the strongest person on the planet at the moment. He said with a confident smile, making Kara laugh. Be careful, make sure you don't do anything too dangerous. Kara warned before pulling him by his neck and kissing him. No promises. Mark said teasingly before heading onto the bioship, which lifted off the ground and flew out the hangar. Mark sat in one of the seats in the bioship as he leaned his head into his hands. Megan was the last to enter before the hole in the ship closed. She then walked forward to the front of the ship and sat down before spinning in her chair and flashing a bright smile to everyone. I'm so happy we are going on missions again together. She said to everyone, getting a smile from Dick and Donna, though Connor didn't even look at her, which was something that made her smile falter a bit. However, she recovered quickly and turned her gaze to Mark. I'm glad to see you are joining the team, Mark. It is always nice to make new friends, she said with a smile. Mark chuckled. I'm not joining the team, Miss Martian. I'm just a temporary addition. Once I complete the job, I'll be back to living my life, he said, though he wasn't prepared for her to look at him like a puppy that had just been kicked. Dick snickered at this. Like you have a life. You were a criminal before your powers awoke, he said with amusement, making Donna giggle slightly. Mark just rolled his eyes and turned to face the window, though before he did, his gaze drifted over to Connor, who was palming a small metal case in his hand. He then quickly placed it in his pocket and followed Mark's example of trying to exclude himself from the group chatter. Though Mark wondered why he did that. For Mark it was understandable, as he didn't know them very well, and they were talking about things he simply had no clue about, such as flying monkeys and Sportsmaster. But for Connor, who had been present for the same missions, it didn't make sense for him to not want to talk. He could just be antisocial, he thought to himself. Mark sighed as he realized that he was looking too deeply into things that he didn't particularly care about. Batman told me that once we enter Bialia we must cloak and go to the specified coordinates where we will wear our disguises and slip into the auction, Dick explained to everyone. Mark snickered. It'll be that easy, will it? He asked. Probably not, but nothing wrong with hoping a little. If we get separated, the mission doesn't change. Make your way to the auction, Dick said before throwing Mark a watch. The GPS coordinates are logged into the watch. We all have one, so there should be no issues with us meeting up, he continued. Unless one of us dies, Connor chimed in a bit morosely. Dick shook his head before continuing to brief them on the details of the mission. Once we reach the auction, we will be splitting up into 2 teams, he stated. Me and Megan will be on recon. Once we enter the auction, we will disappear from the crowd and find where they're storing everything. Mark, Connor, and Donna, you're our heavy hitters. When the time comes, we'll need you to cause a distraction or keep people off us. There are going to be thousands of criminals at this event, so be careful, Dick said with seriousness in his voice. What are you going to do once you find the product? Connor asked. Dick picked up a large duffel bag before opening it. Inside were 4 large poles with a yellow pulsing light courtesy of Cyborg. These will open up a boom tube directly programmed to a vault on the watchtower. Once we get an inventory, we will start moving the most dangerous stuff out that way if there are any problems. There is always Plan B, he said, opening a second bag full of explosives. What will we do about the people? Mark asked as it seemed everyone had forgotten. The whole reason he was there was for Harley, so if they weren't even going to bother helping her, then he'd have to do it himself. Dick sighed, as much as I disagree. Batman has instructed us to prioritize the weapons and dangerous equipment. Mark wasn't the only one not pleased by this development. Both Megan and Connor seemed disturbed that they would be leaving people to a fate possibly worse than death. I don't like it either. But he's right, we can't think about the people here when the weapons being sold have the potential to kill millions, Dick said regrettably, but tried to remain steadfast. But it was hard as he wasn't like Bruce, he couldn't see human life as statistically as he could. Nightwing, we can't just leave them. Miss Martian said reluctantly. Superman wouldn't do it. Connor said in agreement. I agree with Nightwing. It's not what I'd prefer to do, but could you imagine the damage that could be caused with the weapons from this auction? Sometimes some sacrifices have to be made. Donna said as she clenched her fists. Mark couldn't help but snicker as he looked at Wonder Girl and Nightwing. They were supposed to be heroes. He bet now that there were at least over 100 different people waiting for a hero to come and save them, and yet they were going to be left behind. We aren't leaving them behind. You can do whatever Batman wants. I'll be looking for the captives, Connor stated, leaving no room for argument. I can help. No, I'll do it alone, Connor quickly replied. Nightwing breathed out heavily. He knew there was no point arguing, so he didn't even try. Give me and Miss Martian some time before you go off mission. Maybe we can do both if we are careful, he said, though he only got a nod from Connor in return. Good now, Miss Martian, sync us up, he asked her. Not me, Connor said almost immediately. Superboy, we Nightwing tried to say. Stay out of my head, Connor warned, before turning his head away once again. Mark, who was watching the conversation unfold, looked over to Miss Martian, who had a sad look on her face. However, mixed in was a clear look of guilt. Can everyone hear me? Miss Martian said to everyone on the ship apart from Superboy. Check, Nightwing replied. I do, Wonder Girl replied. Yes, Mark replied. We are crossing into Bialia right now, so we should be approaching the coordinates soon, Miss Martian informed everyone. Alright guys, remember the mission, and stay safe. Boom, the whole ship shook, nearly throwing everyone out of their chairs. What's happening? Nightwing asked Miss Martian. We are being shot at, she said in a panic as she took control of the ship, trying to maneuver out of the gunfire. We are cloaked, are we not? Wonder Girl asked as she held onto her seat, the shaking getting even more intense. We are. I don't know how they bypassed it, she replied as she became more and more desperate. As she was connected with the ship, she felt more and more pain as the ship was hit. We can't continue like this, we need to land, Nightwing said. We won't make it down, we are too high up, Miss Martian replied. Then drop us, he shouted back. But you and Connor can't just do it. Miss Martian still looked unsure, but she followed Nightwing's command and the chairs all disappeared into the ship. Connor, who was holding onto his seat, found himself on the floor. What's going on? He asked. Mark laughed. Have fun, he said to him just before circular openings formed below their feet and they all fell out of the ship. Let yourself fall. If you fly, they'll target you instead of the ship, Nightwing said as they looked out across the plains. The fire seemed to be coming from several towers that were located in a large compound that they all recognized as the Presidential Palace. This was also where the auction would be taking place. Nightwing couldn't help but feel concerned that they had the technology to see through the bioship cloaking device. The bioship turned away and tried to lead the gunfire away from the team, however, it abruptly stopped when it got far enough away. It then started firing again, this time at the team as they fell. Nightwing assumed that the anti-air artillery being used was automated, but it seemed he'd made a mistake. Shit, he thought as the fire got closer to them. Shazam! A lightning bolt pierced through the sky and struck Mark, causing a plume of smoke to erupt from him. As the smoke cleared, Mark could be seen floating as lightning danced over his body. He decided to run decoy for the team, so he made himself look as visible as possible. Lightning washed over his body, after which a white skin-tight costume formed over his body with a small white domino mask. Get to the ground, I'll meet you at the destination, Mark told them before shooting off towards the anti-air artillery. Channeling lightning through his arms, he shot a stream down at the towers, and after doing so the firing intensified. That got their attention, he thought to himself with slight amusement. Mark maneuvered through the air and shot lightning down at the towers. Mark, we are on the ground, but be careful, you are heading out of my telepathic range, Miss Martian warned. All right, I'm heading to you now, he replied only straight after one of the anti-air artillery managed to hit him. Mark was blasted out of the sky as he was sent careening to the ground. What the hell kind of artillery is that? He thought to himself as he held his ribs that hurt now. He managed to slow his descent a bit, but still ended up slamming into the ground. Mark grounded as he stood up in the crater he made before climbing out of it and seeing a large group of soldiers surrounding him. Really? He said to them out loud before reaching his hand out and pulling the guns right out of their hand. He then blitzed right in front of one of the men. The shockwave from his movement sent the squad to the ground. Get lost, he said as he floated over them. Mark looked around and saw he was in a very beautiful garden with a pond large enough to be a small lake inside. He looked into the distance and saw that the presidential palace was in the distance. This whole place belongs to the leader of the country? He thought to himself as he whistled in appreciation. I guess being a dictator isn't such a bad gig, he said with a chuckle before slamming his foot on the ground and launching the soldiers that were hiding behind one of the edges into the sky. I was just shooting lightning down at you from the sky, and you send regular soldiers to fight me? He said with a smirk on his face as he flicked a soldier in the forehead, sending him rolling across the ground. Mark then turned as he saw the sound of treads and the roar of an engine. A group of tanks with another couple dozen soldiers seemed to be coming to reinforce the current men. Mark zoomed towards the tank, charging his hand with electricity and touching the tank, overloading its systems and stopping it dead. He then backhanded the other tank, sending it flying away. Bullets were continuously being fired at him, however they fell against his skin, not even bruising him. A tank managed to shoot around at him, however Mark caught it in his hand before throwing it right back, destroying the barrel. I don't want to sound like my dad, but this is fun, he said with a laugh as he clapped his hands, sending a shockwave towards the soldiers, making them grasp their ears in pain. I don't even know why Batman was worried, Mark shouted wildly as he decimated the Bialyan soldiers. Give me a challenge, he shouted as he started to laugh manically. You took the words right out of my mouth, a deep rumbling voice said behind him, though when he went to turn he was hit by something hard and metal. Mark was sent skidding across the ground before crashing into a building by the lake. Mark's whole face hurt. As he reached up and touched his face, he realized his nose was broken and he was bleeding. What the hell did he hit me with? He thought to himself as he shot out of the building to look for the culprit. As he looked down from the sky, he saw the only one who could have done it. Standing at least 7 feet tall was someone who looked like a humanoid lion with white fur. He had a golden mace in his hands and was flashing his fangs as he smiled viciously at Mark. Who are you? Mark asked as he snapped his nose back into place before floating down to the ground in front of the humanoid lion. Who cares, will you fight me? The beast said as his paws clenched around his mace. Mark laughed as he stepped up towards him. You think you can take me? He asked as lightning danced around his body and flashed out of his eyes. The beast smiled once more. That's something I should be asking you. Nolan was standing in a guest room that he'd been given by one of the other attendees of the auction, where he was indulging himself in the selection of food and drink that were available upon request. Next to him was Oliver, who sat on the bed watching TV. Papa, how long until we get what we need? He asked as he was getting seriously bored just waiting here. Nolan, who had just finished eating a large steak, cracked open a bottle of wine. Not yet. We just need to wait for the right opportunity, he replied. We won't be the only ones looking to take something. Once someone causes a bit of chaos, we will slip in and get what we need, he explained. Oliver sighed. I thought I'd be fighting some people, he said with a disappointed expression. Nolan laughed. You'll get a real challenge soon enough. Most of the people at this auction could barely bruise you, he said before putting the bottle down and reaching over and patting him on the back. However, they were both drawn out of their moment by the door knocking. Nolan frowned as he hadn't ordered any more food, so there was no reason for someone to knock. He then looked at the dead body of the man who used to occupy this room. Oliver, get rid of the body, Nolan ordered, and Oliver floated off the bed before flying to the body and kicking him under the bed. Nolan opened the door and had to restrain himself from instantly killing the man in front of him and putting his plan into action. The man in front of him laughed. I recognize that look, Omni-Man. But have no worry, I did not come here to fight or to get revenge for the man your son is shoving under the bed with his foot, he explained. This, however, did little to alleviate his suspicion, and he still looked at him with a frown. Then what is it you want, Mr. Mannheim? He asked bluntly. May I come in? Bruno asked. Nolan stepped out of the way and allowed Bruno to come in. Bruno signaled Deathstroke and Ravager to follow him inside. In Deathstroke's hand was a large metal briefcase. What do you want? Nolan said shortly as he eyed up Deathstroke and Ravager. Bruno walked towards the window and looked outside of it. I know you're not one to mince words, so I'll cut to the chase. It seems there are going to be more doublemakers here than I originally calculated for, he stated before turning around and facing Nolan and Oliver. The guards I've hired are good at their job, but it's never bad to be too careful, so I would like you to provide security services for the remainder of the auction, Bruno explained. Nolan laughed. And why would I do that? He said as he got ready to kill everyone in the room. Bruno smirked before nodding his head to Deathstroke, who cleared the table Nolan ate off and placed the briefcase on top. He then opened it, and inside was a large metal arm. Prometheum prosthetic arm, nigh indestructible and already fitted to your exact proportions, Bruno stated. Nolan immediately reached for it, though as he did his hands went right through it, a hologram. He thought to himself as a look of displeasure made its way onto his face. Bruno laughed at this. Did you think me foolish enough to bring the prosthetic now? He asked rhetorically. No, I am well aware you could kill everyone in this room before I could even blink, so I made sure to remove this product and place it in a secure place, one which you'll be given the location to after your cooperation, Bruno explained. So do we have a deal? Bruno asked as he held his hand out. Nolan found his blood boiling at the audacity of the man before him. But he wasn't a child, and so he quickly cooled down before thinking rationally. He couldn't do much better than a Prometheum prosthetic, and once the Viltrum reinforcements arrived on Earth, he'd get his revenge on the man before him. But for now, he'll play his game. Very well, you have a deal, Nolan replied as he shook Bruno's hand. Nightwing couldn't help but yell as explosions from the anti-air artillery exploded next to him as he plummeted towards the Earth. Unlike his teammates, the only enhanced durability he had came in the form of the body armor he had. If one of those shots got too close or hit him directly, he'd be history. Nightwing, are you okay? Miss Martian asked over their link. They were all falling together and not flying as to make it harder to differentiate themselves from debris. This was the idea, though Nightwing had made the mistake of assuming the artillery ran on an automated system. But it seemed they were manned, and so appearing as falling debris did nothing but make them prime targets. Nightwing was just about to warn everyone to take evasive action before Mark transformed and told everyone that he'd draw their fire and would meet them soon. Nightwing felt a bit better that they now had a clear path to the ground, but he felt bad that Mark had to make up for his own mistake. Why did I not consider their air defenses would have been upgraded? He thought to himself as he fell, though he wasn't able to think for too long as the ground was coming up fast. Nightwing. He heard Donna shout as she swooped in and caught him pretty close to the ground. Megan did the same for Connor, though he looked less happy about it than Dick did. They all landed on the rocky desert below, and Dick immediately checked his watch. There was a town a few miles away from them that was built in front of the presidential palace. All the servants and their families lived there. Batman had managed to find some dissenters who would be able to show his team a secret entrance into the auction where they would slip in unnoticed, though it seems that security is going to be on alert now that they know they're here. Okay, let's keep moving forward. They are going to send a cleanup crew, no doubt, so we need to be gone by then and make it to the town. Keep low and hidden, we can't be discovered again, Dick ordered with the others nodding in acknowledgement. Mark, we are on the ground, but be careful, you are heading out of my telepathic range, Miss Martian warned before they started moving. All right, I'm heading towards you now, Mark replied, though, as he said that they saw an explosion go off in the sky and lightning stop shooting. Because of Mark's outfit, it was easy to tell he'd been hit. Megan covered her mouth in shock. We should help him, she said as she started to fly off the ground, only to be grabbed by Dick. He survived much worse than that, he will be fine. But we need to keep moving or this whole mission is going to be over before it starts, Dick stated in a serious tone. Megan looked conflicted, but eventually, she gave up and followed orders. Dick and his team began moving through the rocky plain as fast as they could. They managed to put a hit of distance between themselves and their landing zone before a squad of soldiers rolled up. There was little cover in this terrain, which wasn't a problem for Megan or Dick, but for Connor and Donna, who had spent their lives fighting and placing less emphasis on stealth, it wasn't helping. Keep moving, we are almost there, Dick said through their mental link. He looked up to check if the search party looking for them had received any air support yet, but they hadn't, which was good for them. Since there was no wreckage and no bodies, they had the advantage of Bialia not knowing who was trying to infiltrate them. Mark wasn't well known, and those who did know him knew he fought against the Justice League at one point, which did well in hiding their identities. It wasn't long before they finally reached the edge of the town, and they quickly funneled in. Where do we go now? Connor whispered. Dick checked his watch to see, but he was having a few issues with it. Quickly come inside, a woman shouted from a doorway opposite them. However, the team just looked at her with suspicion and got ready for a fight. The woman sighed. I am your contact. You want to get inside the palace, do you not? She asked rhetorically, which sobered the team up, and they quickly went inside the house. So do you have any last words? Mark said with a smirk as he held his hand up. Lighting danced between his fingers with increasing intensity. Oh? You'll kill me? I had been led to believe heroes on this planet did not kill. He said with a feral grin on his face as he started to roll his shoulders. Mark shrugged. I'm not a hero, but I probably won't kill you unless you're a weakling, then I might for simply having the audacity to stand in front of me. He stated. Mark felt a slight pain in his heart as he uttered those words, as if he regretted them as soon as they came out of his mouth, but he quickly shook that off and smiled once more. If you're from another planet, why are you here doing security for a criminal? Mark asked curiously. The white beast shrugged. I was told that this planet had worthy fighters that would be able to make my blood boil and bring the excitement in my life that I am looking for, he replied. Mark started to laugh at his words almost in an uncontrollable fashion before he wiped a mock tear from his eye. They lied. He said as he shot a powerful lightning bolt straight at the beast, which hit him directly. Mark lifted off the ground as he floated towards the smoke-filled area that his lightning had caused. As he flew above and tried to see the mangled body of the white lion creature, he was surprised when he jumped out of the smoke with his golden mace in hand, roaring as he swung it. Mark was taken off guard as he felt the golden mace make direct contact with his chest and send him straight to the ground. He felt blood fill his mouth, which he spat out before quickly zooming away and avoiding another swing from the mace. But it seemed it didn't matter how fast he was, as the beast was relentless in chasing after Mark. He ducked under a swing of the mace before yelling and throwing a punch at the beast, which sent the white creature back a couple of meters, though he didn't look too affected by the hit. Mark flew straight at him and tackled the beast into the ground. The earth was being forced up as Mark dragged the beast along the ground, throwing punches at his face all the while. What he didn't expect was for the beast to grab onto Mark's throat and flip their position as he dropped his mace and started pounding Mark into the ground. Mark caught his fist after the seventh punch before using his powers and sending a wave of repelling force out of his body, which sent the beast careening off of him. Mark pushed himself up before touching his hands to his face. More blood was present than before, and it made him scowl. There's no way this beast is stronger than me, he thought to himself as he saw the lion roar at him before it charged at him. Mark yelled as he flew towards the beast, and they both sent powerful punches to each other, which clashed, ripping the earth up around them. Mark and the beast sent punch after punch at each other at a speed that a normal person wouldn't be able to see. Yes, show me more. The beast shouted as he tanked a punch in his stomach before baring his claws and slashing Mark across the chest, which surprised him as he looked down and saw how the beast's claws had broken through his skin. This only enraged him more before he lightning channeled through his body and then launched a devastating punch to the face, which sent the creature rolling across the ground. Mark shot off the ground into the sky, flying high into the air before shooting back down just as the beast managed to flip midair and punch into the ground, slowing his momentum. Mark collided with the beast, causing a large explosion. However, the beast still wasn't injured, and he grabbed Mark by the head and headbutt him before taking a bite out of his shoulder, making the young man scream. He was determined to win this through force of strength, as the beast had wounded his pride, but it seemed he wouldn't be able to, as much as he hated to admit it. Mark sent a surge of electricity straight into the beast's mouth, which got him to let go. He then threw a rapid combination of punches at him before flipping and uppercutting his jaw with his foot. Mark then shot an intense beam of lightning straight at the beast, which sent him skidding back as he tried to hold it back. He then flew towards the beast while maintaining the stream, and at the last second, he cut it off before sending a strong right hook to the beast's face, sending him tumbling to the ground. Is that enough for you? Mark said a little manically as he saw the beast face down on the ground. Though the smile faded from his face as he saw the lion-like creature stand up and crack his neck as if nothing had happened. Why is that all you have? The creature said before turning around and looking at Mark with what he assumed was a mocking smile. Mark screamed before flying right at the beast with his fist drawn back. Though the moment he got close, the beast launched an uppercut which caught Mark in the stomach and sent him up in the air. He then quickly followed as he jumped off the ground and grabbed Mark by the leg before throwing him back to the ground. Mark crashed into the ground, which was quickly followed by the beast slamming feet first into Mark's body. This is truly entertaining, the beast shouted as he walked over to his golden mace and picked it up. Mark had managed to lift himself by the time the beast was back, and he looked at the creature with utter contempt. Mark shot a stream of lightning at the beast again, however this time it was easily dispersed by the mace in his hands as he held it in front of him like a shield. Fine, I guess it's the hard way, Mark thought to himself as he zoomed towards the beast, though his movements were a bit more sluggish than before. Ducking under a swing from the mace, Mark punched the beast in his snout, which hurt him enough for him to scowl at him. Mark then spun midair, avoiding another swing, and then sending a kick straight to the beast's jaw in the same maneuver. Holding his palm out, a red sphere came into existence, which he slammed down into the beast's chest, sending him to the ground. Mark wasn't finished yet. He grabbed the beast by the ankle and started to swing him around at an increasingly rapid speed just before launching him into the sky. Mark then followed after him, flying at his fastest speed. Boom! Mark's connected punches one after the other as he launched the beast higher and higher into the air. The beast growled as he caught Mark's next fist before sending one of his own back at Mark. However, Mark tanked the blow and pulled him closer before headbutting him over and over again, then slamming his knee into his snout and then ending it with a lightning-infused uppercut, sending him higher into the atmosphere. Mark grinned as could see the blood pouring out of the beast's nose, and he flew after him again as he engaged him again. They both slammed blow after blow at each other, though it seemed that Mark was the one taking more damage. However, he didn't stop and he kept on punching him higher and higher before he eventually managed to get onto the beast's back, after which he created a red sphere in his hand, and with a yell he slammed it into the beast's face as he held onto him from behind. The beast started to roar as he tried to reach for Mark and throw him off his back. His claws started to rip through Mark's skin as he tried to grab him, but Mark remained resolute and held on as they went further and further into the atmosphere while he dug the sphere into the beast's face. Mark then pulled back on the beast, which aimed him upwards, and he placed his feet on his back before booting him further into the sky. Channeling lightning into his red sphere, it grew a lot bigger. With a shockwave that would have deafened a normal person, the sphere was launched at the beast, who had no way to avoid it. The beast roared and shouted as he left the Earth's atmosphere, being pushed out of it by the red sphere. Mark followed and flew up to the beast after the sphere had dissipated. He was met with an extremely malicious look as the beast floated in space, unable to move. "He can't fly," Mark thought amusedly as he smirked at the beast. "You would end our battle in such a way," he heard the beast say in his mind. This stung Mark's pride, and he was close to dragging the beast back down into the atmosphere and continuing their fight, but the part of him that wanted to find Harley wouldn't let him. "Our fight isn't finished yet," Mark said, which caused the beast to grin. "But I have something important I need to do," he continued, which morphed the beast's smile into a frown. "If it's more important than battle, then it must be a woman," the beast replied. Mark couldn't help but look surprised at the beast's statement, which caused him to smile. "The most important things in this world: women, fighting and eating," the beast continued. "Go, but do not forget our fight." "Because I will not," the beast warned, as he crossed his arms and closed his eyes. "What's your name?" Mark asked. "If you wish to know my true name, then best me in combat. For now, you may call me Battle Beast," he replied. Mark watched him float away. It seemed this whole fight was more of a game to him, and Mark was the only one taking it so seriously. "I'd be in trouble if he could fly," he thought to himself as he flew back into the Earth's atmosphere and back to the presidential compound, which was now a mess. There seemed to be a barracks by the lake, so Mark landed in front of the building before walking up to the door and knocking. A soldier opened the door and almost pissed himself when he saw the bloodied and bruised form of Mark. However, he wasn't scared for long as Mark slapped him across the face, knocking him out. He walked inside and looked around, but it seemed that this soldier was the only one who was there. He looked down at the man's uniform before lightning started to dance across his body, and his white outfit changed into an exact copy of the soldier's uniform. Mark then went to the bathroom where he wiped his face with water, trying to get the blood off him. He had to snap his nose back into place again as Battle Beast had broken it again. Well, it didn't heal the first time, to be fair, he thought to himself. Mark then searched the soldier, going through his pockets before he finally found what he was looking for. His phone had been destroyed, though Mark wasn't sure if it was the anti-air gun or the fight between him and Battle Beast. "I wonder if Batman has an indestructible phone. That would be useful," he thought to himself as he turned the phone on before using the man's thumb to unlock it. He then sent a message to a person who he knew wouldn't be happy that he just disappeared. Ding! Poison Ivy looked down at her phone, which was on the table, and a look of displeasure made its way onto her face. "About time the bastard contacted me," she said angrily. Unknown. "Hey Ivy, it's Mark. I just wanted to let you know that I've found where Harley is being held." Ivy's eyes widened. Why did he take so long to tell me? She thought as she saved his number and quickly typed back a message. Unknown. "You bastard, where did you go and why did you take so long to contact me? Where is Harley? Tell me now." Mark sighed as he read her message. He was surprised that she answered so quickly and hoped he'd at least get half an hour to himself before she messaged. He quickly saved her number and typed a message back. "Greedy dumbass. I'll send you the coordinates, and the reason it took so long is because she's in a different country." Green wench. So I was right? She was taken by the underground auction. Greedy dumbass. "Yeah, I'm at the auction now, so I'll try and find her, but I'm giving you the coordinates just in case something goes wrong. Can you get to Bialia?" Green wench. "I live outside. Where am I getting this money to travel all of a sudden?" Greedy dumbass. "You said you were an eco-terrorist. Use the money you get from that." Green wench. Are you an idiot? Do you think I get paid a wage to be a terrorist? Besides, I haven't done anything like that in a while. So hurry up and give me money. Greedy dumbass. Fine, I'll wire you over some money, though I should be done by the time you get here. Mark then put the phone back into his pocket as he walked into the barracks kitchen and started eating everything he could find. At this moment he couldn't help but think. Maybe Battle Beast was onto something. With the door shut and his team hidden from possible enemy patrols, Dick leaned against the door and breathed a sigh of relief. While the plan had sort of gone to hell, they'd at least managed to get things back on track. Megan, anything from Mark? He asked as he turned to the Martian, who was standing in the middle of the room, next to their host. Megan turned to him and shook her head. Nothing yet. I believe he may have cut the connection on his end, she stated. Can he even do that? Donna asked as she stood by the window, keeping an eye out. His race has minor telepathic abilities, so it's possible, Dick explained. After taking a second to calm down, he pushed himself off the door. You are late. The woman next to Megan said with an unamused expression on her face. There were some complications. Dick tried to joke around as he smiled, though he could see that she still had the same unamused expression on her face, and so his smile died down. This may be just a game to you and your super friends, but I do not find this nearly as amusing. She shouted in a low voice as she stomped over to Dick. She had long black hair and light brown skin. She was quite beautiful, or at least she would have been if she didn't have a scowl on her face. I assure you we take this dash. This is my country. My home. There is too much and too many people relying on this moment. So no more mistakes. She said as she took a breath and calmed herself down. I'm sorry, miss. Dick said, not able to think of anything else to say. The woman ignored him at first. There were meant to be 5, were there not? Where are they? She asked. He distracted the anti-air artillery so we could land safely. Connor chimed in as he leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. Thanks for the heads up on that, by the way. He said a little sourly. However, the woman didn't look perturbed. I am Clara. That is all you need to know, she said as she walked to the next room. She came out a second later bringing 3 duffel bags which she throws on the ground. The girls is on the left. You two can decide who gets the others. Tell me when you're ready, she said before leaving the room. Charming, Dick said before walking down to the back and unzipping it. Inside was a smart white shirt with dress pants and a red vest and bow tie, something he quickly recognized as a waiter's uniform. Not too bad. He thought to himself as he started going through different possible plans. Once he got inside, people don't see waiters, so that should give me a little wiggle room when moving around. And with Megan able to go invisible, we shouldn't have any issues finding the stockpile of products, he thought as he whipped the clothes out of the bag and started to get changed. Connor pushed himself off the wall and walked to the bag before kneeling down and opening it. No, he said after one look, and he stood up and went back to leaning against the wall. Donna was curious and looked inside of Connor's bag. With a confused expression, she took out his outfit, which turned out to be nothing more than leather pants with chains that were supposed to be used as suspenders and a lookador mask. Dick couldn't help but laugh under his breath, even when faced with the glare that Connor was sending his way. What a curious outfit, Donna said as she inspected the outfit. Megan couldn't help the intense blush that appeared on her face when she looked at the outfit and then at Connor. I'm not wearing it, Connor said in a blunt tone. Dick, having finished laughing, sighed. He knew Connor wouldn't budge on this, and so he relented. Out of everyone there, he had to least to lose if his secret identity was leaked, and that was because he didn't have much of a secret identity in the first place. He was as much Superboy as he was Connor, perhaps even more so. Fine, but change your shirt. That S will just be a giant target, Dick stated. Connor grumbled but took his shirt off and turned it inside out before putting it back on with the S now hidden. Are you done yet? Clara shouted from the next room as she was starting to get impatient. In a moment, Dick called back as he took off his body armor and started to get changed into the suit. Meanwhile, Donna looked at her outfit with a curious look before shrugging and getting changed herself. While most women would be embarrassed to get naked, she didn't much care as she knew her teammates were professional, and it wasn't as if there was anything special to see. Once she was changed, she couldn't help but notice the intense stares that were coming from the 3 of her teammates. Is there something wrong? Donna asked with a raised eyebrow. She was wearing what amounted to a belly dancing outfit that left very little to the imagination, so much so that it even managed to catch Connor's attention. Dick coughed before looking away. No, let's get a move on, he said, as he did. Clara came back into the room before moving the coffee table that was in the middle of the room. After that, she moved the carpet and opened a secret hatch that seemed to lead down into pure darkness. This will lead you to the wine cellar in the basement of the palace. From what my contacts have told me, the auction has already started, she stated. Dick frowned. Already started? But Batman told us we had at least 2 days before it started. Clara shrugged. The timetable must have been pushed up for some reason. It matters not. None of the products will be paid for and delivered until the end of the auction, she explained. Miss Clara, Megan said in a quiet voice. Clara turned her head and looked at the green woman. What? She asks impatiently. Why are you helping us? We aren't here to depose a dictator or help the rebel faction. So why help? She asked. It was a good question, and her other 3 teammates had each wondered the same thing on more than one occasion. Though as usual, Batman had chosen to not tell them the reason if he knew it, which he probably did. Clara frowns before sighing. I have chosen to help you for 2 reasons, she said as she held up her hand. Once you steal or destroy all the product in storage, Rahman will take the blame and Intergang will likely kill him, which will help our cause, she explained. And the second reason? Dick asked. Doesn't matter, she quickly replied. Now hurry and go. Most of the attendees will be in the main hall giving you a chance to sneak inside, she said as she ushered them down the steps. Oh, and here, she said as she threw a flashlight down at them, one which Dick deftly caught. It gets pretty dark and cramped down there, she said with a dark giggle before closing the hatch and leaving the team in darkness. She's quite rude, Donna ended up saying. That's one way to put it, Connor replied before turning around and walking through the cramped corridor. As a half-Kryptonian, he had retained most of their visual abilities with the exception of heat vision, so he was able to move forward and see in absolute darkness. Turning on the flashlight, Dick followed behind him and led the way for Donna and Megan. Megan, do you have the teleport transponders? Dick asked as he squeezed through a particularly tight gap in the passage. Megan nodded. They're under my cloak, safe and secure, she said enthusiastically. Good, we don't want to have to resort to Plan B so fast, he said. I'll be able to distract them, Connor stated as his hands traced the small metal package in his trousers. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Megan said with a slight worry in her voice, though it was ignored by Connor, who kept moving forward. Eventually, after what seemed like an hour of traveling through tight passages, they reached the end, or at least they assumed it was the end as it was a crudely carved-out set of stairs that led up to stone. Connor climbed up first and lifted it carefully as he inspected the room for any people inside. Once he decided that the room was empty, he pushed the block of stone up and to the side before climbing out. The rest of the team followed Connor out quickly before they placed the stone block back on the passageway. All right, I'll go out first and start my new job. Miss Martian, you turn invisible and follow me. Don't be afraid to wander off if you see something, he said through the mental link. He then turned to Connor and Donna. Both of you get to the main atrium. Give us updates on the auction and make a note of any villains of importance that are here, he instructed. What shall we do about Mark? Megan asked. Dick sighed. Mark knows the plan, hopefully. Once he gets here, he will do what he needs to, he stated. But what if he's hurt or worse? Megan asked again. He will be fine. He's probably distracting them all as we speak, Dick replied. Dick saw that there were no more questions and smiled. All right, let's go. Mark finished eating his 5th sandwich and went to go make another before realizing that there was no more bread. He leaned back in his seat before sighing and placing both hands over his stomach. He rocked his chair back and forth for a moment before sighing again. I should probably get back to work, he said to himself, referring to the mission he was currently on. But he had just had a pretty damn good meal and wasn't much in the mood to move yet. Can't always get what you want, I suppose, he said to himself as he got up and started walking towards the door of the barracks. As soon as he opened the door, he was shot and assaulted by the platoon of soldiers that were stationed outside the barracks in an attempt to surround him. Mark caught a shell that was shot at him from a tank and he let it drop to the floor. He wasn't much concerned about the dozens of men surrounding him nor the tanks, but what had managed to catch his attention was the kid that was floating in front of the platoon wearing a familiar white spandex suit. Mark found it familiar because he'd only seen it once, and that was when he'd fought his father. Damn playboy. Mark thought to himself as he shook his head. He did consider that it wasn't Nolan's son and just another Viltrumite, but he quickly dismissed it since the boy was younger than he was. Mark floated up from the barracks before conjuring a sphere of blue in his hands. He shot it out of his hand, and it grew rapidly to the size of a boulder. He moved his hand around like a conductor as the blue sphere decimated the soldiers' ranks. In less than a second, all the soldiers were incapacitated, and the only 2 standing were Mark and the boy. Mark flew towards him and landed on the ground in front of him. So your dad's other son? He asked, though it was more rhetorical than anything. The costume was a dead giveaway. You're the failure, he said arrogantly as a smirk appeared on his face. Mark raised an eyebrow as he crossed his arms. Failure, he replied. What else would you be? You failed in your duty to the Empire, he stated. Mark couldn't help but start laughing. "Kid, have you ever even seen the Empire or another Viltrumite?" he asked, though he could guess the answer. This was a way to probe at what his dad had been up to and whether he'd contacted the Empire. "So what if I haven't?" he asked impetuously. "You'd give up your home to people you've never met? You'd let your mother and family be enslaved?" Mark asked. "It won't be like that. Papa said that they'll make this place better. No more crime or people getting hurt," he said, truly believing the words coming out of his mouth. Mark sighed and smiled sadly. "Reality can often be disappointing, but I'm sure you'll see that soon enough," he said with a look of pity, though this only seemed to piss off his brother even more. Oliver didn't understand how his older brother couldn't see how the Viltrumites would make the planet better. He'd watched friends and family being shot and kidnapped, and even worse, stuff that wouldn't have happened under the watch of people like his papa. He was excited when his papa told him that he had an elder brother, and that's why he volunteered to patrol the outside of the palace while papa kept an eye on the inside. He hoped he'd be able to meet him. He just wished he'd understand so that they could bring peace to the planet together. "I guess I'll need to beat some sense into him," Oliver thought as he held his hands up just like papa had taught him. Mark raised an eyebrow in surprise as Oliver shot towards him with his fist outstretched. Mark swiftly moved to the right, avoiding the punch. "Pretty textbook punch," he thought to himself before dodging another combination of strikes. He was able to ascertain that his little brother hadn't been fighting long and wasn't yet entirely comfortable with using his powers. Mark caught a punch sent at him by Oliver before returning a right hook that sent Oliver slamming into the ground. Oliver shot back up and tried to tackle Mark, but his chin was instead met with Mark's foot, sending him flying upward, spinning out of control. "Why can't I hit him?" Oliver thought to himself as he regained his bearing. Papa had told him that Mark had gotten his powers less than a year ago, so they should both be on the same level. While this was true, he neglected to tell Oliver of all the battles Mark had been in and the near-life or death states he'd been in while pushing himself beyond his limits. That's not even considering that now he had the powers of Shazam. Oliver shot back down, trying to kick Mark in the face, but Mark quickly avoided it and grabbed Oliver's leg before slamming him into the ground. "Stop, you can't win," Mark said lazily as he avoided blow after blow before grabbing Oliver by the face and slamming him on the ground. Mark let Oliver get back up just before dodging a lazy punch thrown by Oliver and sending a full-powered blow to the back of his head. His brother lay on the ground, not moving, though Mark could see his chest rising and falling, letting him know he was still alive. Mark couldn't help but feel a bit bad for the kid, but he couldn't do anything about it now. The only thing he could do was take his dad out of the picture and try and undo some of that brainwashing. Turning away from his brother, he looked down at one of the soldiers. Looking at his shoulder, he could see he was an officer of some kind. Lighting danced across his body as the soldier's uniform appeared on himself. With what he hoped was an effective disguise, Mark quickly made his way towards the palace, though he landed a short distance away before approaching the palace with a gun in hand. Approaching a back entrance that was guarded, the soldiers all saluted him. Mark had copied a black face mask that he wore around his face as he was sure that his disguise would immediately fail if they saw his face, so hopefully this would prevent that. Mark smirked under his mask as the soldiers all saluted him, but that smile quickly disappeared when they started speaking to him in a language he didn't recognize. "Shit," he thought to himself as the soldiers started to get suspicious when he didn't reply. He zoomed in front of both soldiers before knocking them both out with light slaps to the face. "Worth a try, I suppose," he said to himself, though when he went to walk past them he felt a tingle at the back of his mind. The same type when he had gotten the idea to merge red and blue. He crouched down next to one of the soldiers and placed his hand against his head. A spark of electricity flowed from his hand to his head, and a rush of information flowed inside of him, making him wince in pain. "I guess I speak Arabic now?" he said to himself as he stood up. He knew he had some minor telepathic abilities, but he had no clue they could be used in such a way. Maybe it was the lighting powering it? He thought to himself before walking inside the palace. All that could wait. Now he'd fulfill his promise and find Harley and get the hell out of there, maybe helping the team along the way. "Donna, have you got eyes on the stage?" Dick asked as he walked down the corridors of the palace with a tray in hand, hoping that none of the workers there would question him. "I do, though I will admit that I am extremely upset about what my role in this mission is," Donna stated as she spun around and danced on one of the various circular stages that were littered throughout the crowd. Once she entered the room, she was grabbed by a matronly sort of woman and ushered up onto one of the stages to take the place of another girl whose shift was over. Not wanting to compromise the mission, Donna followed her orders instead of bashing her face in. "I'm sorry, Donna. If this were a normal mission we'd have more leeway, but if one thing goes wrong then everything can blow up in our face," Dick explained. "I know," Donna replied, though she still wasn't happy about it. "Do you have eyes on Connor?" Dick asked. Donna spun around the pole in the center of her small stage, almost sneering at the leers she was getting from the people below her. But as she spun, it gave her a good view of the room, and she managed to locate Connor, who was leaned up against the wall looking in her direction with a smirk on his face as he held up his phone recording her and gonna kill him. She thought to herself before she turned back around to the stage. I have eyes on Connor, she confirmed. Good. Can you tell me the direction from the stage where the products are being taken in? Dick asked. They're being taken onto the stage from the left-hand side, she replied. Dick immediately turned on his heels and started walking in a different direction. To avoid suspicion, he'd take the long way around the main atrium. Once there, they could start looking for the storeroom. Megan, go ahead of me. There's no point in me slowing you down, Dick said to the green girl floating invisibly above him. With a nod, she flew down the corridor, making her way to said location. Meanwhile, in the main atrium, something was happening. The products stopped being rolled onto the stage, and instead, 5 people with sacks on their heads were brought on stage by none other than Deathstroke. They all had a similar outfit to Donna, which was hardly anything at all. I'm afraid to say this, but in an escape attempt, one of our finest products was broken, Bruno Mannheim shouted out across the atrium, much to the booing and jeers of the audience. I know, such a loss will undoubtedly be felt, especially to my wallet, Bruno said, eliciting laughter from the audience. One of the people on stage was struggling greatly, so much so that Deathstroke kicked her in the back of the leg, forcing her to the ground. The sounds of her struggles were audible and made those closer to the stage laugh at her expense. But let it not be said that I am not an optimist, for with every loss brings new opportunity, Bruno said grandly. He gestured for the hoods of the women to be taken off, and Donna almost gasped. While she only recognized 3 of them, it was the identity of those 3 that shocked her. Harley Quinn, Killer Frost, Giganta, and 2 other unknown women have been brought on stage. Donna informed Dick, who was troubled by the news. Megan, is Mark still dark? Dick asked. Yes, I've tried reaching out for his mind, but I have to be careful as he might not be the only telepath here, she said with concern. Donna, what are they doing? So the audition continuing? Dick asked, trying to get a grasp on the situation. No, something different is happening. I'm not sure what though, Donna said as she paused dancing. The crowd laughed as Harley struggled and shouted through her gag, though none laughed more than the people who knew her personally. Killer Frost and Cassandra both stood at their sides, while Giganta and another girl who goes by Kate stood on each end. Harley had convinced them all that they could escape, and while they had come close, they were stopped in the end by Deathstroke and Ravager. Needless to say, Bruno was not happy when he found out they had destroyed the last known vial of the extremis virus that was in his possession. Bruno knew that even 10 of these women wouldn't recoup the loss of what they had destroyed. It's a good thing he had an idea to recoup such losses. The women before you cost me a lot of money that simply won't be recouped by their sale alone, he said with a dark grin on his face. So I've decided to take advantage of my audience. Why, in front of me I have the very worst of society, so I'm sure you'll all enjoy what I have in mind, he said as behind him a screen turned on showing a white room with a cage inside. The cage was constantly rocking back and forth as if what was inside was desperately trying to get out. This is product number 067. A creature so savage and so violent that every single attempt we've made to try and tame it or break it has led to utter failure and more than 100 deaths. Bruno explained, much to the interest of those in the audience, especially the booths for the rich clientele. Bruno then pressed a button on a pad he held and the door to the cage opened. The whole audience, including Donna and Connor, waited with bated breath over what they might see. A red-clawed hand reached out of the cage, crumpling the metal as it pulled out the rest of its body. A huge red monster standing at least 7 foot tall with thick coiled muscles. It had a massive maw with sharp teeth and looked like a sort of human dinosaur hybrid. Product number 067, also known as the Ragnar. Now don't worry everyone. This creature will be for sale just like everything else, he said as he raised his arm assuredly. But now we are going to have a little gamble, he said, almost cackling with glee. Beneath our very feet lies a large group of tunnels specifically designed for the storage of our more dangerous creatures, he said with his smile stretching even wider. On the screen, the creature immediately started bashing the walls of the room it was in. Some of the crowd panicked as they could feel the force of the blow reverberate throughout the floor. But before they could panic, Bruno held up a reassuring hand. Be calm, my friends. Those tunnels are built for people strong enough to fight Superman himself. They won't be brought down by such a primitive creature, he said with a chuckle that seemed to do well in reassuring the audience. Now we move on to what this event will entail. Let me remind you that you are under no obligation to take part, but we all know you can't help yourselves, Bruno said with a grin on his face. The screen behind Bruno changed from the image of the Ragnar to a screen that had the faces of all 5 women. Above their heads lay general information about each woman. To make things interesting, I shall be taking off their collars and allowing them use of their meta abilities, if they have any. He added the last part with a laugh as he looked at Harley, who was still raging beneath the gag. So my friends, place your bets on who will be the last to have their flesh picked clean from their bones. Bruno shouted as 5 spotlights shone down in front of him. 5 different areas were set up for each of the 5 women where the audience could place their bets. Those in the booths were attended to by the staff and given their personal computer where they could place their bets. While all this happened, Donna jumped down from the stage and started making her way over to Connor. "Wonder Girl, what's going on?" Dick asked over their link. "Megan, can you share my memory of the event over the link?" Donna asked. "Give me a moment," Megan asked, and she pulled up the surface memory of what Donna had seen. "Shit, that's not good," Dick said once he saw it. "We need to let Mark know," Megan said as she redoubled her efforts to find him. "No," Dick replied. "What do you mean, no? The whole reason he is here is to save Harley," Megan stated. "If we let him know she's here right now, our cover will be blown, and we lose our chance to find the storage area," Dick said bluntly in a way that was rather reminiscent of Batman. "We will tell him, but we need to focus on the mission first," Dick stated. "You've seen what's about to happen. By the time we find the storage, she'll have been torn apart by that creature." Megan shouted. "Miss Martian, I will not compromise this mission for a woman who has killed dozens of people and terrorized Gotham for years. Stick to the mission. We can use this as they'll be distracted with the game for a while," Dick replied coldly before he stopped talking and refocused on the mission. Both Megan and Donna felt guilt surge through them as they watched the women get led off the stage. Mark would never trust them or work with them again if they went through with this. But more than that, they would be dooming 5 people to a horrendous death, 2 of whom they weren't even sure were villains or not. Megan. Donna called, trying to speak privately with the Martian. "Donna," she replied. "Try and find Mark. We can't let them all die regardless of the consequences," Donna stated, much to Megan's surprise. Donna had very much taken Dick's side earlier in the ship, so for her to change her mind like this was very much surprising to Megan. However, she wasn't about to question it. "I'll do it," she replied before speeding up and searching through the hallways for Mark. "Ah!" All 5 of the women screamed as they were tossed down a chute by Deathstroke and a couple of guards. They all tumbled and hit each other before they fell from the ceiling in a white-tiled corridor. As they fell to the floor, the chute closed up behind them, being replaced by another white tile. They all groaned in pain as they stood up and detangled themselves from each other. Cassandra quickly untied and removed the gag from Harley's mouth. "Those bastards' wench faces!" Harley shouted at the top of her lungs as she looked up from where they fell. "Should have left the gag in," Killer Frost said mostly to herself as she rubbed the arm that she fell on. Harley looked at her with an annoyed expression before flipping her off. "It's your fault we got caught, so maybe I should gag you," Harley shouted as she shoved her. Killer Frost scowled as she shoved Harley back. "I didn't do shit. It was you who tried to steal some of the products while we were trying to escape," she shouted. "Tried? Wench, I don't try anything, I did steal it," she said back with an arrogant laugh before putting her finger in her mouth. Without gagging, she stuck it inside deeply. The girls looked quite disturbed as they saw her throat muscles expanding and contracting, and a moment later she removed a small black box-like item that glowed red. "That's disgusting," Giganta said as she saw Harley's spit drip off the box. "I'm sure there are some people who might appreciate that skill," Kate said with a smirk on her face. "Thank you," Harley said with exasperation. "What is it anyway?" Killer Frost asked. Harley shrugged. "I'm not sure, but it looked valuable," she replied. "Stop with this foolishness, we have more pressing issues right now," Giganta shouted at them. Just as she said that, the collars around their necks unclamped and fell to the floor. Giganta, Killer Frost, and Kate all felt their powers return to them, and Giganta immediately started to grow. She then slammed her fist into the ceiling as hard as she could, but she underestimated the strength of the material that it was made out of, and she felt her bones crack at the impact. She growled as she recoiled in pain and slowly shrunk back down to the floor. "Are you an idiot? Did you think they'd give you your powers back if you could use them to escape?" Harley asked as she laughed at the tall woman. Giganta scowled as she looked at the blonde woman and took a step towards her. "Maybe it won't work on the ceiling, but it will against you," she said threateningly as she started to grow again. "We have bigger problems than you two's pissing contest," Killer Frost said as she stepped between the two, freezing the air as she did. "This beast will be easy to kill since we have our abilities," Giganta stated as she started to walk past Harley and the others. "I will go and dispatch the creature. Once I do, I'm coming back for you, Jester," she said threateningly as she looked back for a moment before turning back around and walking down to the corridor, turning around the corner. She wasn't the only one who was gone. Harley, Cassandra and Killer Frost quickly realized that Kate had managed to slip away too. ROHR, we should probably go. No arguments here, Cass. Alright, time to run. Mark walked through the corridors of the place disguised as a soldier. His mind was still reeling from the influx of information that had been poured into him, but it had gotten better, and now that the information had settled, he did think it was pretty amazing that he was able to pluck that information out of the soldier's head like that, and learn a whole other language in an instant. He just wished it hurt less. Mark knew he was getting closer as his ears started to twitch. He could hear the loud sounds of shouting and cheering letting him know he was getting close to the main auction room. Hopefully I can slip right in without them noticing, he thought to himself as he started walking faster, quickly getting closer to the source of the noise. He spotted a large pair of wooden doors and carefully opened them. If the large stage didn't give him a hint that he was in the right place, then the large crowd of people certainly did. He slowly edged around the crowd as he tried to locate Superboy and Wonder Girl. Maybe I shouldn't have cut myself off from them, he thought to himself as he tried to spot them through the crowd. Ah, no, please. Mark heard the screams of a woman with a deep voice. It was accompanied by the groans and disappointed sighs from the crowd. Looking towards the screen, he saw a giant red-headed woman being eaten by a red-skinned dinosaur-like creature while she was still alive. Her intestines were being torn out of her body, eventually sending her into shock. These people are sick. Mark thought to himself as he pushed his way through the crowd. Such a shame. Giganta really should have taken me at my word when I said this creature was a Superman-level threat. That's 1 down and 4 to go. Bruno shouted from the stage. The screen then switched to something that made Mark's blood run cold. He saw Harley and 2 other women running down the pure white corridors as they had looks of horror on their faces. He didn't know how long he watched the screen, but he was snapped out of it when someone grabbed his arm. Donna had recognized him as at some point Mark had taken off his face mask. Mark, before you do something rash, clear your mind, she advised. The cold feeling in Mark's veins had already been replaced with a boiling heat so hot that he thought it might burn through his skin. Where are they? He shouted at her. He said those tunnels were beneath our feet. That is all I know, she said, feeling a little intimidated at the look Mark was giving her. Mark immediately turned around, pushing people out of the way overtly as he left the main atrium. He started floating above the floor for a moment before he dived head first into the ground, digging himself towards the tunnels that Donna spoke of. He wasn't used to digging through rock, but it wasn't that hard once he got the hang of it, similar to swimming. Mark soon hit something that he couldn't dig past and theorized that he had hit the ceiling. Slamming his fist down, he scowled as the material didn't even crack. He did it again and again, smashing his fists bloody against the material, and yet it did not give way under his strength. Nothing he could think of worked. Not his spheres nor his lightning, he could not get inside. I'll have to use that, he thought to himself as he thought back to the move that he'd used against his dad. He hoped he wouldn't have to, as combining both red and blue was exhausting, both mentally and physically, something that would disadvantage him when he had to fight that creature. I have one more thing I can do before I try that, he said to himself as he held his hands together. Holy crap! Harley screamed as she ran and jumped over Kate's dead body. What the hell? Killer Frost shouted as she jumped over a different Kate's dead body. Cassandra jumped over another dead body with the same features as Kate. The entire corridor was covered in blood and guts, all belonging to these duplicates of Kate who were now dead. You think she's still alive? Harley asked. No, I don't. Killer Frost replied with a deadpan expression on her face. As they turned the corner, they saw multiple Kate all attacking the red monster, and all of them getting slaughtered and eaten. Back, back, back. Harley shouted as she started running the other way again, with Killer Frost and Cassandra close behind. However, it was too late. The Ragnar, after killing the last Kate, sniffed the air and started to run down the corridor after the trip. Killer Frost turned around, seeing the Ragnar slowly catching up to them. She turned around and slammed her hands on the ground, freezing the entire corridor. The Ragnar slipped and its body slammed on the ground before it slid further down the corridor, getting closer to them. Oh wow, gee, thanks Frosty, you helped us a bunch, Harley shouted as she turned to see what her companion was doing. Killer Frost turned around and scowled at Harley. I don't see you trying to do anything, she shouted back. 'Cause I don't know how this damn thing works, Harley replied as he fiddled with the small box that she had stolen. They all kept running, but as they turned a corner they saw that they had hit a dead end. Damn it, Harley shouted as she hit the wall. Killer Frost seemed more panicked as she summoned up a wall of ice to try and protect them from the approaching Ragnar. But it was in vain, as the creature broke through the ice like it wasn't even there and started thumping towards them, its claws scrapping against the ground, making a sound that made the girls cringe. All three of them placed their backs against the wall as they waited for their impending doom. Harley couldn't help but feel regret that she never got to see Ivy or Mark again before the end. The Ragnar growled as it started to sprint towards them, intent on feasting upon their flesh. Crack! The girls were all dumbfounded as in front of them appeared a man wearing an army uniform. He had electricity dancing around his body, and he was holding his hands together as he breathed heavily. The man quickly held his arm up, and a stream of lightning shot the creature back down the corridor. He turned around, and his helmet disappeared in a flash of light. Harley couldn't help the gasp that left her lips as she saw Mark standing in front of her with a smirk on his face. "Hope I'm not too late." "Where the hell were you?" Harley shouted as she slapped and tried punching Mark, who just stood there, and took it with a barely audible sigh. "This isn't the place, Harley," he whispered loudly as he tried to grab her arms. Finally relenting, she stopped hitting him and instead, to his surprise, grabbed him by the neck and pulled his face to her own. Mark had no idea what was happening until her lips pressed against his own and her tongue was going wild inside his mouth. Harley moaned as Mark's tongue played with hers, though as she opened her eyes she could see the red monster standing up at the end of the corridor. Her eyes widened, and she moved her head back, detaching her lips, and pushed Mark away. "What are you doing? This isn't the time. There's a monster right there," she shouted as she pointed behind him. "Are you for real?" he asked rhetorically. She just stuck her tongue out at him. Mark turned around and faced the monster that was roaring down the corridor. It didn't look so tough he could take it. Though he was feeling a little drained from his earlier stunt, he knew that all he needed to do was move a couple of meters below, so he used his metapowers to bend space at both points and essentially attach himself to the opposite end. When he let go and space was returned to normal, he was flung to the other end, making it appear as if he teleported. Quite a useful ability, though it hurt like hell, he thought to himself as he started approaching the Ragnar. "Don't worry, girls, I'll deal with this monster in no time at all," he said arrogantly as he went to channel lightning through his arms to send another stream at the alien creature. Only as he did it fizzle out. He looked at his arms and quickly realized that he couldn't summon any lightning at all. He was also losing muscle mass and felt the powers of Shazam leave him, and his clothing also reverted to the ones he wore before the mission started. "What the hell?" he thought to himself, but he didn't have much time to think as the Ragnar charged at him and lunged with its large maw open. With wide eyes, Mark held his arm up and sent a repelling force straight down the corridor, which stopped the Ragnar, but the creature continued trying to get to Mark. "Here, Marky, use this," Harley said as she took the small box-like item she'd stolen. Mark deftly caught it before looking at it. "What is it?" he asked with apparent confusion. "She doesn't know," Killer Frost said drearily. "I do too," Harley said adamantly. "Oh, don't you start," Harley said as she shot Cassandra an annoyed look. "This isn't helping," Mark shouted back as the Ragnar was pushing back and threw his repelling force. Mark decided this wasn't going to work and shot towards the Ragnar before flipping around and kicking it with both legs, sending it back down the corridor, though it seemed to barely faze the creature, who charged back at Mark again, who had to quickly dodge its sharp claws. Still, it seemed he wasn't fast enough as they managed to scrap his side, drawing blood from his skin. "What the hell is this thing?" he thought to himself. He could walk off a tank blast without a bruise, but a light graze from this creature's claws managed to cut him. He'd have to be careful. Mark pushed off the wall before launching himself towards the Ragnar and sending his fist directly into the beast's stomach, forcing it back in its feet. It charged at him again, but Mark already had a red sphere in his hand that he shot towards the Ragnar. Luckily, this had a greater effect and forced the creature back, giving Mark some breathing room. "Shazam!" he shouted, and while he heard the bolt, he didn't feel any different. "Shit. It must not be able to reach me," he said to himself before sighing. "Looks like I'm on my own this time," he said as he charged towards the Ragnar, who swung his large claw at Mark, who avoided it by spinning midair. He went to go and grab the creature's arm to try and throw it, but what happened instead was Mark being carried along with the creature's arm. "Sechiti!" he shouted as he was swung at rapid speeds before being smashed into the wall of the corridor. Mark's eyes widened as the creature opened its mouth to chomp down on him. He quickly brought his feet up, pushing against both upper and lower jaws, but it was quickly made clear this creature was stronger than him. It grabbed Mark's leg, its claws digging at his flesh before throwing him roughly to the opposite wall. Mark screamed as the claws dug into him, made worse by the rough impact of being thrown. Mark quickly zoomed off down the corridor with the creature chasing after him on all fours. The creature was a lot faster than Mark thought, and in this confined space he struggled to stay ahead of it. Flipping around just before the creature's mouth snapped around his leg, he sent a kick up against its jaw, launching the creature to the ceiling as it roared in pain. He capitalized on his advantage by sending a rapid flurry of punches to its body. The Ragnar responded by swinging wildly at Mark, who was barely able to avoid the unpredictable swings. 3 of the claws ended up scraping against his stomach, leaving more large gashes. HHH. He screamed in pain before scowling and slamming his elbow down on the creature's snout. The Ragnar tried to snap at Mark's arm, but Mark shoved a red sphere under its jaw, sending it flipping backwards. He then reached out and pulled the Ragnar right back towards him before spinning around and kicking the creature in the snout again. Taking a deep breath, Mark thought that it might be over, as for a moment the creature looked to be unmoving. However, the moment he let his guard down, the creature lunged at him from the floor with its jaws open, snapping its large teeth around Mark's body. Mark managed to catch the 2 large teeth before its jaws could snap shut and undoubtedly kill him. He'd seen what the creature's claws could do to him. He didn't want to find out what its teeth would. "Get off!" Mark shouted as he struggled to push the jaws apart, the teeth slowly sinking into his sides, making him grunt in pain. "What do I do now?" He thought to himself as he tried using his meta powers to force open the creature's jaws, but to no effect. The teeth started to enclose more and more. His legs finally started to feel the pressure. Crack! The sound of glass breaking in his pocket made its way to Mark's ears, and he was confused for a moment, but then remembered the stupid box Harley had thrown to him that didn't do anything. As he tossed that thought away and tried to go back to figuring out a way out of this mess, he started to feel a cold substance touching his skin through his leg. Frowning, he looked down at his leg and saw blackish metallic liquid start to pool all over him, engulfing his body. He tried to shake it off, but due to the situation he was in now, he couldn't, so all he could do was watch as it made its way across up his body towards his face. Mark tried to move his head out of reach, but it was all in vain, and the liquid covered his face, engulfing Mark in darkness. Though it wasn't for long. In a matter of seconds, Mark regained his vision, though it was like he was looking through a red visor. It had a HUD and information in a language Mark didn't recognize. "What the hell?" was all he could think to say. Language recognized, Earth English. New user detected. Please state your name. A Mark. He said dumbly. Recognized, Mark Priority 1. If Mark wasn't in a life or death situation at the moment, he'd be freaking out. Today had been one gigantic cluster shit with invisible ships, bipedal lions, and now a monster was trying to eat him. "Listen, this is great and all, but I am currently about to get eaten, so if you don't mind getting off my body, that would be great," Mark said roughly as he felt his muscles start to strain. However, the voice didn't answer him, nor did it try and leave his body, meaning he'd have to escape with this weird thing on his body. Though as he continued pushing, he almost jumped as the voice returned, though he had to admit what it said was something he wanted to hear. Maximum Armor Bruno stood on the stage with a frown on his face as he watched the feed from inside the tunnels. He was assured that the material used was next to invulnerable, and yet this boy had managed to get inside. Not only that, but that damn jester had managed to steal quite an expensive item that was now bonded. "No matter, the boy will die regardless," he thought to himself as he straightened his tie. Before he could continue watching, he felt a strong grip grasping his shoulder, and he was immediately spun around. Nolan was there, and he didn't look happy. "Where did you get a Ragnar from?" he asked, though it was less a question, more of a command to answer. Bruno dusted off his shoulder. Now Nolan, don't forget your place. We wouldn't want your new arm to disappear now, would we?" he said with a malicious grin on his face. Squelch! Bruno heard it before he saw it. In the moment that he blinked, Nolan, who was holding nothing, was now holding an arm. He soon realized that it was his own arm that the Viltrumite was holding and began to scream in pain. "You bastard!" he shouted as he gripped his socket where his arm used to be. "You forget who you're talking to," Nolan said in a deadly calm voice. "I am not Superman, I am not a hero, I am not a villain. Do you want to know what I am? Bruno Mannheim," Nolan said as he floated towards the leader of Intergang. "Your conqueror." With a quick swing, he slapped Bruno with his own arm, sending him toppling to the ground and knocking him out. At the same time, the guards started pouring in and shooting at him, and the criminals in the audience all started to go wild as they fought each other, tried to escape, and started looting what they could. Connor scowled as a man with a hockey mask tried to slash him with a machete, only for it to break when coming into contact with his skin. He sent a fist to the man's stomach, knocking him out before engaging with the other criminals. Donna was much the same, as many men had already tried to grab her. She flipped and kicked and punched her way through the crowd as she treks to make her way to Connor Dick. "It's all gone wrong. Where are you?" she asked through the link. "I'm breaking into the storage area now with Miss Martian. Delay them as long as you can," he replied before cutting off. Donna watched the stage as Omni-Man tore the Intergang members limb from limb while making his way to Bruno, who had pulled himself up from the ground and was crawling away. "Deathstroke!" Bruno shouted as he spat blood everywhere. His teeth were all but gone as they lay spewed across the ground. Bang! Nolan moved his head as a bullet raced past his ear. He looked up to one of the top boxes where the mercenary stood with a sniper rifle. Is that the best you can do? Nolan asked rhetorically, and in the next moment, he was at eye level with Deathstroke. The mercenary dropped the sniper before pulling out his gun and unloading the magazine into Nolan, but the Viltrumite had already flown behind Deathstroke and kicked him off the balcony. The force of the kick made his armor creak, but he was otherwise okay. While he fell, he unclipped a grenade and threw it up towards Nolan. While Deathstroke engaged Nolan, Bruno called in for reinforcements. This whole thing was erupting and he needed to regain control. Nolan caught the grenade in his hand with a smirk on his face, though he wasn't expecting for it to start emitting a sonic frequency that made his ears bleed. He growled as he crushed the device in his hands and rocketed down to Deathstroke, intent on impaling the man through that damn helmet of his. Though just before he reached Deathstroke, he found himself being tackled from the side and carried through the wall of the building. Through the wall he was smashed through before he was spun and thrown outside. Nolan spun midair before slowing himself down, only to be hit with a powerful bolt of lightning that sent him straight to the ground. Do you remember me, Omni-Man? We met such a long time ago. The man said as he floated down towards Nolan. Black Adam. Nolan said as he scowled. Dick was working as fast as he could as he hacked the panel leading into the storage area. After Megan had followed someone who was wheeling back a product from the stage, they had managed to find where everything was stored. But the problem was they had a high-level encryption key as well as a phase disrupted around the room, meaning Megan couldn't shift through into the room. Dick whipped his head up as the door opened, and he grinned. Now we are in business, he said excitedly as he rushed through the door. He had put his mask back on now, as their disguises were practically useless now. Dick gaped as he looked at the large storage area. The amount of products in this room seemed to go on forever as it stretched down long aisles. Miss Martian quickly set up the transporter modules. He instructed before he quickly started trying to find a way to move all of this stuff in bulk. In the corner of his eye he spotted a forklift and he smiled. They didn't have much time, so they needed to be quick. Bang! As he went to approach the forklift, he heard a banging sound and he turned around. Before him was someone he knew well, ever since he was a child, Joker. He said angrily, though his anger was short-lived as he felt a wet feeling on his lower body. He looked down and saw that he was bleeding just above his waist. Nightwing. Miss Martian said in a panic as she flew over to her teammate who just fell on the ground. Oh, Nightwing. Ha 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 ha. Joker mocked as he placed his hand on his heart. What are you doing here? Dick shouted weakly as he tried to push himself up with Megan's help. What is any man doing here, old sport? Trying to get himself a new toy to play with, or in my case trying to take back what belongs to me, he said as he threw a platinum rock up into the air before putting it in his pocket. I won't let you, Dick said as he reached behind him for a wingding to throw. Ha 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 ha. The Joker laughed with increasing intensity as he stepped towards the duo. Bang! Dick fell to the ground as he failed to dodge another bullet from the Joker. The man continued to laugh at Nightwing as he struggled to push himself off the ground. Oh, look at this, he said as he saw Miss Martian charging at him with her fist drawn back. Bizarro, Joker called, and before Megan could reach the Joker, Bizarro reached her and tackled her to the ground before he started pummeling her with his fists, spraying blood across the floor. Ha 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 ha. Joker laughed as she was slowly being beaten to death. You didn't tell me you were such a wonderful artist, Bizarro, the Joker shouted out. Me like green woman, Bizarro said as he punched her again, which made her go limp. Nightwing saw what was happening and reached for his wingding before throwing it at the Superman copy, who turned his head in anger as it rubbed where the metal had struck it. Bizarro flew towards Nightwing and kicked him, sending him straight through the wall. Nightwing felt all his ribs break in that kick and knew that he wouldn't be making it out anymore. He had one lad thing he could do, but he needed teleport conduits to do it. Getting them in his current condition would be next to impossible. Donna, I need backup, he called out through the mental link, only to be met with silence. It didn't take him long to figure out what was happening as Megan lay in a pool of her own blood, unconscious. I guess it's the hard way, he said to himself. Come on, Bizarro, I think it's time we make our grand opening, Joker said as he tapped the monster on the back, causing him to follow Joker around like a puppy. This will be my greatest joke yet, he said in a dark, deep tone that was accompanied by a malicious grin. Maximum armor, oh shit, Mark said to himself as he felt the suit he was wearing tighten around him. The jaws of the Ragnar were no longer piercing his sides, and he felt the suit push them out of his body. Though the Ragnar wasn't giving up so easily, and redoubled its efforts to bite Mark in half, he could hear and feel the grinding of the beast's teeth against his new armor. Had he not been wearing it, his body would have been shredded by now. Warning: Armor losing integrity, damn already? This creature has quite the bite, he thought to himself, as he quickly tried to formulate a plan on how to get out of there. Mark turned himself in the Ragnar's mouth, increasing the pressure on his back, which increased the rate his armor was failing. However, he wasn't finished yet, and he quickly summoned up a red sphere on his now free hand and slammed it down in the creature's mouth. He grew the sphere as much as he could, pushing himself to the limits of what he could make. Snap! Mark felt the Ragnar's lower jaw go numb as he dislocated it. The creature screamed in pain before jumping back and trying to carve through Mark's body with its claws. Mark ducked underneath one swing but was too slow to avoid the other. Sparks flew as its claws connected with Mark's armor, the force of which threw him back to the wall. Mark pushed himself off the wall, zooming straight toward the beast, tackling him to the other wall, and then spinning around and throwing him down the hallway. This should be a little easier now that he's lost one of his main weapons, Mark thought to himself as he watched the Ragnar stand up, and then much to his disbelief the creature grabbed its jaw and popped it back into place. No freaking way, he thought to himself as the Ragnar roared before charging at him again. Hey, suit, you got any other abilities that might help right now? Mark said in a slight panic. Maximum strength. Mark's pupils dilated as he felt what could only be described as pure power surging through his body. Let's go, he shouted before flying towards the Ragnar. He avoided its claws before slamming his fist directly into the beast's stomach, causing a large shockwave to echo throughout the tunnel. But Mark wasn't done as he rushed after the Ragnar, sending a flurry of punches and kicks. Eventually, they reached the end of the corridor and the Ragnar was slammed up against the wall, where Mark treated the beast like a punching bag, hitting it with fist after fist. The beast sent a wild swing at him, but Mark caught it with one hand before uppercutting the Ragnar in the jaw, sending it to the ceiling. He followed it up their shoulder, barging it into the hard material before grabbing it by the neck and throwing it back down to the floor. The Ragnar roared in pain at the constant assault, and as it got up to continue the fight, Mark slammed down on the creature feet, first having used his power to make himself heavy. This feels amazing, Mark said to himself as he put his foot on the Ragnar's neck before applying pressure, intending to snap it. The Ragnar started wildly swinging at Mark, managing to claw his legs. The Ragnar was able to carve through the armor and tear at his flesh, forcing Mark to fly off the creature. What the hell was that? Mark said as he looked at the blood pouring from his legs. Armor mode is deactivated. Shit, so I can only have one at a time, Mark said to himself. Being a bit more careful now, Mark launched himself back at the Ragnar, that seemed to be slowing down as it swiped at him with his claws. Mark ducked under the swings before slamming his palm into the creature's chest. A massive crack echoed throughout the corridors. It seemed that the Ragnar had taken too much punishment and its ribcage had finally given way. Mark quickly found himself being launched across the corridor like a pinball as the creature spun around, whipping him with its tail as it went after him. Mark attempted to slow himself down, but as he did he realized the creature was right on him. Armor mode. Armor mode, he thought in a panic as the beast's large maw opened. Maximum armor. The sound of metal creaking echoed out as Mark's entire upper body was in the creature's mouth. He slammed his fist into the creature's snout multiple times, but it seemed like the creature was in a rage. The Ragnar whipped him around like a chew toy, slamming him from the floor straight into the walls. Each hit managed to lower the suit's armor a considerable amount, making it just a matter of time before he was bitten in half. This damn creature knows what it's doing, Mark thought to himself as he frustratedly tried to get out of the beast's grasp. Mark summoned a blue sphere with his free arm and let it float above the creature. At the same time he summoned a red sphere inside the mouth of the creature, pushing it to the roof of its mouth. With the combined effort of both forces, the creature's mouth opened and Mark flew out. Alright, time to end this, Mark said as his blood boiled. Maximum strength. Mark flew at top speed towards the creature while holding his arm up. He clotheslined the Ragnar, carrying the beast with him as he flew down the hallway. He then slammed it into the wall at the end. The Ragnar recovered quickly before it swung at Mark again. However, Mark caught the creature by the wrist, stopping it dead. The creature tried to swing its other arm at Mark, but he caught that one as well. The creature struggled as it snapped its jaws at Mark, who was barely an inch away. Mark jumped up and slammed his feet into the Ragnar's chest before he started to push, all while maintaining his grip on the beast's arms. He was about to rip the arms of this creature right off its body. The Ragnar screamed as it felt its limbs start to stretch. Not being able to attack Mark, he settled for equalizing the force and pulling back. Mark scowled as he realized that he wouldn't be able to overpower the Ragnar enough to be able to rip off its limbs, unless... Mark grinned as an idea sprung to mind. Mark started pulling with his full power while the Ragnar struggled to stop him. A moment later the Ragnar started feeling pressure on his chest where Mark had his feet. Two red spheres were forming at the bottoms of his feet, and they were growing in size. The Ragnar started screaming and thrashing as he quickly lost strength when fighting against both forces. Mark grinned as he started to hear flesh tearing and the beast's shrill screams of pain. He grew the spheres as much as he could before sending them forward. R.I.P. the Ragnar was sent flying backwards while Mark remained in the same position. Only this time he had 2 large appendages in each hand. Nanosuit entering recharge mode. Mark felt a bit naked as he felt the nanosuit withdraw from around his body. He pulled open his shirt and saw that there was now a red square on his chest that he assumed was where the suit was housed. A piercing scream pulled Mark out of his thoughts as he saw the Ragnar try to stand up, though it failed as it kept slipping on its blood. Mark floated towards the beast. As the Ragnar saw Mark coming towards him, it tried to get up. Its violent nature seemingly increased since it was now injured. However, without arms, this creature wasn't a threat as long as he was careful and didn't do anything stupid. Mark zoomed into the creature, kicking under its chin, which flipped it up in the air. He then flipped forward, axe kicking the monster down to the ground. He then increased his weight to its maximum and flew down to the creature. The momentum combined with his weight managed to fully shatter the already broken ribs of the creature. The Ragnar could do nothing but scream and try to attack Mark, but even that was wholly ineffective. Mark stood on its chest as he made his way towards its neck. Slamming his foot down roughly, the creature started to choke, though Mark knew this wouldn't be enough to kill it. Mark summoned 2 red spheres with each hand and then slammed them at the sides of the Ragnar head. He grew them to the size of bowling balls and continued pushing, combining the repelling force of the sphere with his own strength. The creature roared and Mark could see the creature's head start to deform. He only looked at the creature with contempt as blood started emerging out of the beast's orifices, splattering into Mark, who didn't even flinch. With one final yell, Mark pushed even harder and finally, the creature's head gave way and the top of the creature's head burst open from the pressure. The creature immediately went still as the light from its eyes died. Mark breathed heavily as he stood up and got off the creature. He wiped the creature's blood off his face and ran his hands through his hair. As he did this, he managed to spot 3 women at the end of the corridor spectating the fight. He gave them all a smile. "See, told you it would be easy," he told them. Mark was sitting down on the ground next to the body of the Ragnar with Harley, Killer Frost, and Cassandra. All 3 women, including Harley, looked at him with something tantamount to disgust. The reason being that Mark was feasting on the tough meat of the Ragnar. While he had to admit it was hard to chew, the insides of the Ragnar weren't nearly as tough as the outside, making it okay to eat. "You guys sure you don't want any?" Mark asked as he took a bite out of what he imagined the creature's heart was. "I'm okay," said Killer Frost. "I'm vegan," said Harley. Cassandra moved forward as she understood the gesture of offering food and sat next to Mark. Mark ripped off a tiny bit of meat and gave it to her, which she started to nibble at with a little difficulty. Mark didn't particularly want to eat this, but the nanosuit had advised him that his energy levels were below what they should be, and that he should either rest or consume some food. To be quite honest, Mark didn't think it tasted that bad. In fact, he thought the beast tasted quite good, especially the parts of the brain that he had tried. "I hope I'm not going crazy," he thought to himself. Harley quickly snapped out of the daze she was in, and a scowl made its way onto her face. "Hey Buster. You still have a lot of explaining to do," she said as she pointed a finger towards Mark. Killer Frost looked at her like she was crazy. This man had just ripped apart a beast that was capable of killing them like it was nothing, and she was antagonizing him. However, much to her surprise, Mark just smiled. "I'm sorry, Harley. I didn't mean to leave you, but when I saw my dad on TV, I had to go and see him," he explained. Harley knew who Mark's dad was as well as how long it had been since he had seen him. However, she had appearances to keep up, so she turned her nose up at him. "Don't think I'll forgive you so easily. You're gonna have to make it up to me," she said as she crossed her arms, which had the effect of pushing her considerable breasts even further out of the coin bra she was wearing. Mark then just had a sudden realization. The 3 women in front of him were dressed incredibly scantily, and they were all extremely attractive. Mark was still a young Viltrumite, and so he had to make a conscious effort when he was around women not to grab them and go to town. Right now was a terrible time for him as he had just had a tough fight and had just eaten. Now his body was ready to smash, and in front of him were 3 lovely women to choose from. "Battle Beast, you are wise beyond your years," Mark thought as he tried to control his bodily urges. "I'll make it up to you any way you want," said Mark with a little strain in his voice. Harley looked back at him and was surprised to see the redness on Mark's face, as well as how he seemed to be shaking slightly. "What's wrong with him?" Harley thought, but she quickly concluded as she looked down at Mark's body and saw the bulge in his pants starting to form. She smiled sultrily before she started to crawl forward. "You mean it, Marky? Will you do anything I want?" she said in a low tone which only made things worse for the young Viltrumite. I will, Harley, but you need to stop. Mark said as he started pushing himself back, which only made Harley's grin widen as she crawled faster towards him. Killer Frost and Cassandra looked at the scene, one with nervousness and the other with curiosity. Killer Frost didn't know that this was the man that Harley often talked about while they were in their cages, and so to her, it looked like she was antagonizing a man who could kill them all with a single punch. Cassandra, however, looked at the scene with curiosity as their body language was quite confusing. Mark seemingly tried to get away from Harley, but Cassandra could see that he wanted her to catch him, or at least that's what his body language suggested to her. Gotcha! Harley shouted as she jumped on Mark, wrapping her legs around him. She flinched slightly as she felt his bulge rub against her coochie, sending a rush of pleasure throughout her. Mark had his hands on the ground. Harley, stop please, he asked as it was getting exceedingly difficult to restrain himself. Harley wasn't aware of what his Viltrumite heritage encouraged him to do, so she thought that she was just getting back at him and teasing her. They had lived together for a while, and he hadn't responded badly to any of her teasing. However, what she didn't know was that in Mark's injured state, his body prioritized healing, therefore his shadowinking urges were toned down a great amount. Come on, Marky. You did say you'd do anything, she said as she ran her tongue up the side of his face while she slowly ground herself on him. While she was teasing him, she had to admit that grinding on him like this felt good. Good enough for her to do it a little faster. Harley, stop it now, Mark said loudly, trying to give her a final warning. Harley, I think you should listen to him, Killer Frost said a little nervously. Nuh-uh, Harley said rather childishly as she was having too much fun. Mark couldn't control himself any longer and found himself giving in to his urges. Harley let out a small squeak as she felt Mark's schlong grow even more than it was. Before she could even do anything, Mark had already stood them both up, and she was now being held against the wall with Mark holding her up by the legs. Marky, no hard feelings, right? She said a little nervously. With a single thought, Mark used his powers to tear her clothes right off her body. You wouldn't, Harley said with a nervous smile on her face as Mark undid his trousers and released his schlong from his underwear. He would. She thought to herself, she didn't want their first time together to be in a place like this. Ah well, I guess I shouldn't have teased him, she thought as she shrugged her shoulders. Boom! Nolan was sent through the air after receiving a punch from Black Adam. Nolan scowled before catching the next punch and headbutting the man, then whipping him around and throwing him to the ground. You've gotten stronger, Adam, but you're still just an insect to me, Nolan said as he slammed into the ground in front of Adam. Black Adam stood up with anger in his eyes. He had made a promise all those years ago to kill the man before him. He would kill Omni-Man even if it meant his death as well. He yelled as he shot a stream of lightning towards Nolan while he flew towards him. However, Nolan stopped it with one hand, though he was pushed back slightly. Seeing Black Adam approaching, he flew to meet him, raised his arm, and smashed his fist into the back of his head hard enough to create a large crater. Give up, Adam. I've had better fights with my son than you, he said with amusement as he grabbed him by the neck and started slamming his head down again and again. Black Adam felt his blood boil and his anger surge at Nolan, but he found himself helpless to fight against the man's power. But he wouldn't give up. He would kill the man who destroyed Kondak.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.